Good evening. I call the August 8th, 2007 meeting of the Los Gatos Planning Commission to order. I'm Joanne Telesfor. As chair of the Planning Commission, I and my fellow commissioners welcome you. The Planning Commission is composed of citizens appointed by the Town Council to review planning and development issues and to make decisions and recommendations to the Town Council regarding land use matters, both commercial and residential. Our actions are guided by the town's general plan policies, zoning codes, and other standards and guidelines that have been adopted by the Town Council. Thank you for attending tonight's meeting because we appreciate any public testimony we will have tonight, as it does help us in our evaluation and review of projects. And with that, Mr. Suda, would you please take roll?
Commissioner Bourgeois.
Here.
Commissioner Rice.
Here.
Vice Chair Kane.
Here.
Chair Telesfor.
Here.
And we'll note for the record that Commissioners Siak, Michichi, and O'Donnell are absent.
Okay, thank you. And we will go on with Mr. Rice will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join us.
Please join me in the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The procedure we follow at our meetings includes to please remember to silence your cell phones. And then if you speak tonight, would you please fill out a speaker card? You will find these on the backs of the chairs that you're sitting in. And then hand them over to Mr. Paulson if you're on that side, or if it's more convenient, over to Arlene, who's on my left, or Mr. Parsons. Thank you. That would be better, Mr. Parsons. He's not taking minutes tonight. Thank you. Let's see, what else? And if you are, when you do get up to speak, if you are an applicant, I'll let you know this now, you will have up to 5 minutes to address the commission, and then time again, we'll call you up later for a rebuttal after members of the audience have spoke, if they choose, to rebut and present the rest of your ideas. And if you are an interested party who wants to speak on any item that is on the agenda, you will have up to 3 minutes to speak. When you do come to the podium, if you would please state your name and address and then make your presentation or tell us what you want us to know. And then what I'd like you to do is stay there in case we have any questions for you. Okay? Thank you. And if you wish to speak on an item that's not on the agenda tonight, you'll have that opportunity in just a few minutes. I do need to, right now, commissioners, we need to look at minutes. And I'll need a motion to approve. We have minutes for 2 meetings, and that was for July 11th and July 25th. Are there any changes or additions to those minutes? Okay. I do have a speaker card on the minutes from Citizen Ray.
Yes. I wanted to speak to the minutes because, as you will remember, I complained bitterly the last meeting about the quality of the minutes, how essentially they were suitable for idiots only, okay? And that the town council had heard my complaints previously, had changed their minutes to incorporate the gist of what was said so that you could read the minutes and, as a normal person, and know what the hell went on, okay? Any kids tonight? I don't see any kids, so I'll use a little hell once in a while, okay? Oh, excuse me out there. So, someone has now appointed Arlene here, our administrative assistant, to do the minutes just like the town council, okay? And lo and behold, the minutes that you have before you tonight are a marvelous change for the better. Hooray for Arlene. okay? And hooray for the good, honest people in local government in Los Gatos, okay? We will persevere. Thank you.
Thank you, Citizen Ray. Written communications, commissioners, I did receive a transactions bulletin, and this is regarding transportation news for the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'll have it here if you'd like to review it, or if anyone wants to read it. It's here for that. Thank you. We have a requested continuance. Thank you. Let's get back to the minutes. I thought we were finished. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, Commissioner Kane.
I move the minutes as presented of the July 11 and July 25 meetings be accepted.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? None. Thank you. All right, now we can move to requested continuances. And that would be item 4 on our agenda tonight, and that is at 274 Los Gatos Saratoga Road, Architecture and Site Application S-07-158, requesting approval to construct a new commercial building on property zone C2 APN 51014-076. Property owner is Chevron USA Incorporated, and the applicant is Chris Blackwell. It's being continued because their plans were not completed as we would need them. Is that correct, Mr. Suda?
Yeah, actually, the applicant just is simply not prepared to
Not
proceed with
prepared
the
to
hearing tonight.
Present, okay. Thank you. So I will need a motion for that, please. Mr. Commissioner Bourgeois?
I move to continue architectural site application S-07-158 to the meeting of August 22nd.
Okay.
I'll second that.
And Commissioner Rice seconds that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed, none. Passes. Subcommittee reports. As part of being a planning commissioner, commissioners do serve on other committees in town, and then we report on it as we have attended those meetings. And today we did have a conceptual development review committee meeting. I would like Commissioner Rice to present that for us. Thank you.
We had a meeting today for the CDAC, and we looked at a project on University Avenue on the Verizon telephone company property. I don't have the address off the top of my head. You still have that? It is 930 University Avenue. The proposal was to build a mini storage facility in the neighborhood of 98,000 square feet of total space, and we gave the proposed developer our comments, and I think we'll probably see that something along regarding that property again in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Did we have any other meetings? No. Thank you. Okay. Let's move on then to verbal communications from the audience. And at this time, I would invite anyone who has anything to speak about that's not on the agenda to please get up. And I don't think I have anybody. Citizen Ray? It says minutes. Did you give me 2 cards? Well, I'll entertain receiving your card after you speak then. Go ahead. Why don't you go ahead up and get up and speak? Well, it's my mistake, and I will entertain you at the podium right now. Thank you.
Yes. I wanted to, first of all, comment on the fact that hooray for Citizen Ray, okay? And this is not an ego trip. What I'm talking about is the fact that the community is recognizing this movement for honesty and integrity in local government in a fantastic fashion. Hardly a day goes by when a perfect stranger that I run into doesn't have something to say because they recognize me. I don't know them. And today, the same thing. Woman says, keep them on their toes. Wow, isn't that fantastic? The citizenry is responding to the movement for honesty and integrity in local government. Beautiful. Speaking of honesty and integrity, for those of you who watched the council meeting Monday night, and most of you did, evidently, thank you, you know that the neighborhood, the adjoining neighborhood, were quite taken by the council's approach to hear all the issues relative to the granting of the rezoning on the retail and restaurant application at Lark Avenue, okay? And we, the people from that neighborhood, were able to talk about in depth about all the 3 to 4 to 5 major issues that you, the Planning Commission, with the help of the Planning Department stooges, refused to talk about, okay? The town council was not buffaloed by licentious lords and the stooges, okay? And they said, we will talk about the issues that the people want to talk about. And we did. And what a marvelous basic outcome, okay? They passed the rezoning, but they refused to allow Lortz and the stooges, the DRC, to hear the A&S review, which is coming back, okay? Even though Lortz tried, and the developer, in consent with Lortz, tried to sabotage your action requiring that hearing come back to you, the town council refused to hear their pleas and said, the Planning Commission wants it, the Planning Commission promised, and it will come back to the Planning Commission.
Thank you,
So
Citizen Ray.
hooray for the honest people in
Thank
local
you,
government,
Citizen
the
Ray.
town council
That's a warning.
of Los Gatos.
One warning.
Thank you.
And by the way, for the record, you
I'm just
gave
wrapping
me,
up is all I'm doing.
by the way, for the record, you did give me 3 speaker cards. You needed to give me 1 more for the public verbal communication. Thank you. Okay, moving along, let's go to the to consent calendar, and that would be item number 1, and that's at 14170 Blossom Hill Road, conditional use permit U-07-151, which is requesting approval to operate a martial arts studio on property zone C1, APN 527-32-031. Property owner is Blossom Hill Investment Company, and the applicant was Claudia Peterson. I'll need a motion on that? Or discussion? Well, it's a consent, so we'll have to pull it.
If I get my question answered, I may or may not.
Is it to me or to
Staff, please.
Okay. Commissioner Kane.
Mr. Suda, I read the application before us and had a fundamental question of how does this find its way to the consent calendar? Are there rules governing what gets to consent? Is it as I read it, is it a de minimis consideration where you think it warrants a simple stamp of approval?
There's no hard and fast rules in the town code or in the state government code, for that matter, on what can or cannot be on the consent calendar. What staff does is assess the project. If we identify any potential issues, then we do not place it on the consent calendar. If we go through the analysis and haven't identified any issues, and it's the type of application where the commission has not identified issues in the past, then we'll place it on the consent calendar. And that was the case for this application.
Well, I read the report, and even though it requires a CUP and establishment of an exemption under Section 15301, it just struck me as an unusual case of, clearly an improvement, no concerns over CEQA, et cetera, and that kind of case can be put on consent, yes? Okay, good.
Thank you very much. Good information. And so, Commissioner Kane, do you
I'll
want to
make a
follow up
motion.
with the motion?
Make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Okay, thank you. I'll need a second. Seconded by Commissioner Rice. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed? None. Okay, unanimously passes. Okay, we'll move on now to the continued public hearings. And that would be item 2 on the agenda, if you're following along. It is at 17140 Millrise Way, Architecture and Site S-07-151, requesting approval to construct a new residence on property zoned HR1, APN 532-19-016. Mr. Paulson will be introducing this project to us, Commissioners. And in the meantime, the applicant has handed out additional information for us, and I think you all have that. Thank you. That record could reflect that. Okay, thank you very much.
On April 6, 2004, the Development Review Committee approved a new home on this parcel. During construction of that home, an unmapped fault was found during the excavation for the proposed cellar. Subsequently, a fault investigation was conducted and it was determined that any new home on this site would have to be 15 feet from that fault. As a result, revised plans were submitted which complied with the fault setback, and on November 6, 2004, the DRC approved the revised plans. However, no building permit was ever subsequently permitted, and that project expired. Currently, the applicant's requesting approval of plans to construct a 5,543 square foot two-story single-family residence, a 764 square foot three-car garage, and a 3,592 square foot cellar. The parcel contains 43,611 square feet, and the allowed floor area for this site is 6,000 square feet for the home plus 400 square feet allowance for the garage. Additionally, they're also proposing a pool with a covered trellis. The maximum height of the proposed residence will not exceed 25 feet. The exterior materials will consist of smooth trowel stucco and stone veneer, recessed wood window and door details, and a natural slate roof. It should also be noted that the applicant has stated that the project has been designed and will be constructed in an environmentally responsible manner, and that they have applied for LEED for Homes Gold Standard certification. The proposed project will require 970 cubic yards of cut, 200 cubic yards of fill, which will necessitate 770 cubic yards of off-haul or export. The proposed homes predominantly within the least restrictive development area. There's no areas that encroach into areas on the site that have slopes in excess of 30%. However, the proposed footprint does encroach into the drip line of 2 trees. The consulting arborist has reviewed the proposed project. The applicant's proposing to remove one of those trees. However, even if both those trees are saved, the recommendations of the arborist will be upheld, so staff determined that it was in substantial compliance with the intent of the compliance with the LRDA. 12 trees are proposed to be removed on this site, 9 of which are protected pursuant to the town's tree protection ordinance. The arborist determined that 5 of the 9 removals complied with the town's protection ordinance. However, recommended that 4 trees be retained. The applicant revised the plans to retain 2 of the 4 trees and is requesting that the commission consider allowing him to remove tree 19 and 38, which the arborist suggested to be retained. The consulting architect reviewed the project as well and supplied 6 recommendations for modifications. The applicant has complied with 4 of the 6 of those. Recommendation 4, which was use of stone on the southwest corner of the house to carry the stone on the front elevation around to meet the stone on the west side elevation. The applicant is proposing not to do that and will further explain his reasoning. And secondly, recommendation 5 looked at not using the concave roof forms at the eaves that are proposed, but using normal roof slopes and eaves. Staff's available if the commission has any questions.
I have a question. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, I do have a question, and that would be in David Babby's, the consulting arborist report, page 7 of 12. It says, under design guidelines, it says, given the discrepancy of tree locations found on site, the locations of the following trees should be resurveyed. I was just wondering, do you know if that's been done?
That was done.
That was done, okay. And additionally, the actual location of the water meter in relation to tree number 1's trunk, should also be identified?
That will be a condition of approval, and that will be identified.
All right, thank you. All right, Commissioners, seeing that we don't have any other questions, I will call the applicant up. And I'd like to remind the Commission that the staff is asking us to review for appropriateness the removal of tree number 19 and number 38, and review the consulting architect's 6 recommendations for modifications, especially number 4 and number 5, which Mr. Paulson read to you. Okay, and with that, would you please introduce yourself?
Tony Jeans, 170 Station Street, Los Gatos. I'm going to jump straight in on a couple of things that Joel brought up. I'm assuming you've read the letter of justification. I'm not going to go into any of the details that I put in that. Joel mentioned the water meter. There is an existing water meter. We propose to use that rather than putting in a new one. The old house that was there had that same water meter. We're staying in the same place. The materials that you see on the table are the materials that we're going to be using. The stucco is shown, the wood window detailing is shown, and small chips of the stone material are shown in terms of representative color. This house has been moved onto a location on the site to avoid the existing earthquake. We've also put in a full basement through to be able to put a full structural slab underneath. The cellar element is justified for 2 reasons. One, because of the green nature of the building, and also the earthquake fault and the foundation design that we're having to use to deal with the adjacent fault. I'd like to let you know that we have the support of all the neighbors, and one of the handouts that I gave you showed that. I also gave you a handout making a request for a small change. If you approve this project, I'd like you to incorporate the change into the requirement. It is for additional screening and the removal of one small area of the photovoltaic solar array on the roof to put in a landscape balcony area that will provide more privacy between the neighboring homes. I'd like to address the tree removal. Tree 19, Barry Coate said, in my opinion, removal of the entire pine tree would benefit the neighbor's redwoods and smaller coast live oaks that are growing beneath its canopy, as well as several of the olives in that area that are providing screening between this property and the adjacent one to the north. One of the signature lists are the 2 immediate neighbors that are impacted by that tree, and they are both requesting the removal of that tree in exchange for planting some additional trees that will act as a better buffer. The tree is also a severe fire hazard for this house. We've also requested the use of copper gutters and downspouts as long as they are treated in such a way as to be environmentally sensitive. The Hillside Guidelines suggest the use of copper. For the very first time, I've seen the consulting architect question that use. So I'm going to throw that at you. I would like to address the green nature of the house, and my chief architect, Brad O'Donnell, will present a few issues here.
My name's Brad O'Donnell, 170 Station Street, Los Gatos. So I was going to talk about the green aspects of this house. And we hear a lot of talk about green these days. It's sort of become a corporate branding and identity thing. But what we're proposing to do with this house, and I will talk in detail very quickly about the list, is to be certified through the LEED program, which is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's the preeminent program in the United States for certification that a building is green, established by the United States Green Building Council. So far, in the States, and especially in California. It has not applied to homes. It's for commercial and institutional buildings. You'll see it associated with premier projects such as the Cal Academy of Sciences up in San Francisco. There's a pilot program for LEED in the state of California. We've asked to join that in the state of California for homes. We've applied to join that. We've been accepted into that pilot program. What that means is that someone from the San Jose area will be participating in this process with us, verifying that we are in fact meeting the stringent requirements of the checklist required to achieve the gold rating for the LEED. That's how you know it's actually sustainable. So we're putting our money where our mouth is. The strategies we're going to use, I'll go through quickly. There's building strategies. First one is that we're proposing photovoltaic solar electric to power the house. We're also going to be using advanced framing techniques to minimize the waste. That's no more than 10% of the framing excess. So timbers will be cut to a more accurate size from the get-go. That is something that's verified by the LEED third party. We'll be using FSC certified woods, and FSC is the Forest Stewardship Council. It is the primary.
Oh, why don't you go ahead and finish your sentence?
Yeah, no, I've also put in a speaker card for myself. But
You did.
got it.
I have it here.
Okay, I'll go ahead and set up. FSC is the preeminent way of specifying that wood has been sustainably harvested. We'll be using that for all the cabinets, trims, and windows.
Okay. You know what, I think what happened here is that Mr., I forgot your name, your last name, Brad. Mr. O'Donnell took over part of Mr. Jeans's presentation, but he did put in a speaker card. Maybe we could give him 3 minutes. Is that okay? Thank you.
Okay, so we talked about photovoltaic solar electric, talked about advanced framing techniques, Forest Stewardship Council certified woods for the trims, cabinets, windows, and doors. We'll also be using reclaimed quarter sawn oak from the Everglades. That's old growth oak, but it's pulled up. It's been underwater for a long time. So we're looking at using fly ash in the concrete. Fly ash reduces the amount of Portland cement that's used in the concrete. The manufacture of Portland cement is carbon intensive, so you get credit in LEED for using stuff that's going to reduce the global warming impact of your concrete. We'll be using a blown-in soy-based insulation with extremely high R values. It's pretty self-explanatory there. All the windows where it's appropriate to use low-E coatings we'll be using, and of course they'll be double-glazed, probably argon-filled or very efficient windows. We're also proposing lots of long-term materials, the multicolored slate roof, the copper, flashing, and gutters and downspouts. The longer term, the higher quality of the material, the more inherently stable something or sustainable something is, all other things being equal. We'll go on to site strategies. We've situated the house lengthwise north-south to take advantage of daylighting strategies. So run a computer model. You can see in our computer model the windows receive lots of daylight, but very little direct sunlight. So we minimize heat gain. We maximize the amount of usable light into the house. Essential in this daylighting strategy will be those eaves with the changing slope. Changing that slope allows us to lower the profile of the roof while extending the eave out. So that is an essential feature in using daylighting in the house. We'll also be relying on trees, especially deciduous trees, for reducing the heat gain in the house. That's another daylighting strategy. Moving on to HVAC, we'll be using a radiant heat in the house, and we'll either be using standard AC at a very high efficiency, like a 94 SEER. We're also investigating using a ground source heat pump, which is a very efficient way to exchange heat with the earth. It's better than putting it into the air. Either way, we'll be going with the LEED requirements for that. We've designed the house to take advantage of what's called the stack effect, and that is we've got an area inside where there's enough height that if we put ventilation at the top, we should be able to generate a current of air inside the house just based on temperature differences. That enables a breeze to move through. A breeze makes it more comfortable at any given temperature, so you can keep the temperature a little higher. We'll be using solar hot water heating in addition to the solar photovoltaic, both for the pool and for the house, for the hot water heating in the house. Moving on to water then, we propose to reuse both the gray water, which is the water that comes out of sinks and not toilet areas, and rainwater capture, both for irrigation on the site. We're also be using, of course, very efficient fixtures in terms of water.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioners, do you have any questions at this time? Commissioner Bourgeois.
I have a number of questions. Can I?
You can, and are you directing them to both?
We can, right?
Excuse me, are you directing them to Mr. O'Donnell and Mr. Jeans?
I believe I probably have questions for both of them.
Okay, fine. Would you both remain at the podium then? Thank you.
Sure. First of all, thanks for this updated landscaping plan. I think it's much better than the one that was in our packet, and it was very helpful. I have a number of questions, the first of which, one of the recommendations by the consulting architect is to not have the concave eaves. And if I read the letter of justification right, that was for passive solar shading. How does the concave nature on the top of the roof facilitate that? I'm not clear I understand that justification for the concave roof.
The concave element is only in the last 4 feet of the roof. So the pitch of the roof is a 6/12 pitch. It comes down, and in the last 4 feet, it flares out so that we can extend the eave out to have a 4-foot overhang. That will give us the passive solar that we need. We get the daylight, but we don't get the direct sun.
So if you kept the same pitch, you wouldn't have as long of an eave.
Correct. We would if we made the house taller, various other things that won't work. We've also done a design like this before, and it's worked very successfully, and it's a very pleasing look. We did one at the top of Wooded View, so if anyone has been up there.
Okay, thank you. That's next. I noticed in the desk item we got there, one of the changes you talked about the additional screening, but there's also now planter boxes on the roof deck instead of an additional solar array. I'm just wondering why the reduction in the solar array. Was there, some calculation of use that went into that reduction, or a shade study, or?
We haven't completed the calculation of use. We are going to try to maximize the amount that we can put. It was more of a privacy issue between the owner and the immediate neighbor to the north, and a compromise to facilitate additional screening was, instead of having a lower level solar array, to have plantings which will probably grow up an additional 3 feet. So my client will not be able to see their roof and into their yard, which happens to be the entertaining part of their yard. And it's just a mutually beneficial issue.
So it's primarily a privacy issue.
It's a privacy issue. If we have to relocate part of the solar array for electricity onto the area over the pool deck, we will do a secondary area over the pool instead of some of the solar hot water, because we think it's more efficient. But we haven't done a full calculation of that yet, because we are planning to use fluorescence throughout the house, and we don't know quite yet how much we're going to need until we get into the full structural design stage.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to know the justification why that changed, and you answered that. And again, I really applaud all the steps you're taking, especially the gray water system and all of these steps to get LEED certification. The one thing that kind of alarms me is the amount of grading and the amount of off-haul. 770 cubic yards. Have you guys thought about the benefits of sinking the house into the hillside versus the impacts of 75-plus dump truck trips and the air quality impacts from that?
We can retain an additional 350 yards on site if you want us to do so. We think that is very achievable, and we would work with the engineering department to do that. We can't retain all of it on site. We are putting in a cellar with a full structural slab, in part because of the immediately adjacent fault. And that requires an 18-inch cross-section of slab, the way we've had to design it. If you want to reduce it down to 40 dump trucks, then you might suggest that, and we will implement that.
So, I mean, you threw out a number pretty quickly, so it's something you've probably already thought about and thought about placement. Where and how would that material be retained on site? I mean, just...
We have.
Yeah. Where?
Oh,
and like how, I mean, is it a 6-foot difference in a small area? Is it a 2-foot difference on a broader area?
No, it's about a 6-inch difference on a lower portion between the house and the road, and a smaller portion where some of the planting areas are, where the fruit orchards are. That's already been graded down a little bit, the way I see it. I used to rent a house on this property before it was torn down, so I know the property very well. And that's why I know we can easily get away with 6 inches without any problem on that site.
Has an arborist been talked to about additional tree impacts from placing that material, or
There are no trees in that area.
no trees in that area? Okay. And
It was the area that had been cleared ready for the previous house that was approved, that they started building, and then all of a sudden, they discovered the fault.
okay, great. And then, if I may continue, I just have a couple.
You may.
I have a couple questions on trees. There's a lot of discussion about the trees, and I don't want to talk about tree 19 and 38. I'll save my comments for that later. But I want to talk about tree 30. Now it's a dual-stemmed oak tree, and it's one of the stems has some damage, and the arborist said it has low quality for retention. And I was wondering, so you're going with his recommendation to pull it out, and I would ask you to reconsider if the structural nature or deficiencies of the tree do not jeopardize the project in any way. Obviously, if it is in conflict with a driveway or house, it doesn't appear to be, to my reading of the plans. But one of the reasons we have tree protections is not only aesthetics, but it's also habitat, especially in our hillsides. And some of the trees that look the worst to an arborist because they have cavities in them look the best to wildlife. So, if we're really trying to do a green project, I would urge you to consider saving tree 30, and I would just ask you, before you come back with your rebuttal, maybe take a look at that and see if there is any conflict between the project and that tree. And that's it.
Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Bourgeois. Anyone else have a question at this time? I have a question of staff and Mr. Parsons. Mr. Parsons, I'm hoping you can answer this for me. Mr. Jeans has said that he would be willing to keep another 350 cubic yards on site, and he told us where he would spread that. Do you see any conflict with that or any issues that might arise with that?
No, we also took a look at that. That was the area that we thought, the area of the formerly approved house and its yard it's a flat area, there's no trees in it, and it will take the amount of soil that Mr. Jeans indicated.
Okay, and thank you. And Mr. Jeans, you are keeping 200 on already, so then this would be an additional 350, or is it 350?
That's correct.
So it would be then
550.
50.
Yeah. And the reason, by the way, that I jumped at that number was I was not here when this project was continued last time from a month ago. Word got to me that one of the commissioners, and I don't know who, had questioned whether additional material could be left on site. So I did actually do that calculation to say what could easily be done without any impact to the site whatsoever.
Okay, commissioners, do you have any other questions at this time? None. Okay, we will call you back up for a rebuttal, and in the meantime, I have 2 other speaker cards. I'm sure we'll have more questions for you. Citizen Ray.
Yes. I'd like to, first off, congratulate Mr. Jeans for what appears to me to be a very understated, elegant mountainside home. Boy, I am impressed with the architecture. That home will meet the #1 criteria for mountainside homes, and that is, does it blend with Mother Nature? Okay? Does it present a stiff, 2-story, in-your-face look, or does it appear to be relaxed, and will it fall into place without much ado. And I say he has accomplished that number one goal beautifully, okay? Architectural-wise, the only thing I would comment on, I agree with the town architect that the whoopsie-doo at the end of the roof is a bit quirky. You can achieve that same extension of the roof for shadow without putting a curve into it. I mean, that's a no-brainer for an architect, and I know you're an architect. So, to me, it gives it a Far Eastern look. And I don't see it as being organic to itself or to the neighborhood. And I agree totally with Cannon that it's odd, purely odd, okay? As far as the large basement, I think you need to take a look at that off-haul, just as Mr. Bourgeois said. 79 10-wheel dump trucks. That's a hell of a program of dirt moving out of there. And if it can be done easily without disrupting the town, it seems to me it's preferable to having a fill spread all over the lot. I mean, that leads to problems of its own. So I just urge you to think about that, okay? So there it is. Lovely home, perfect for the Los Gatos mountainside. And if you approve it and it's built, it should be a model for other architects, okay? And also the fact that Mr. Janes has presented you with 3D architectural renderings. Now that, we now have the software, so that's easily done. And
Thank
that
you.
is a beautiful, may I wrap up?
Finish.
That is a beautiful way to approach architectural renderings here in the 21st century.
Thank you. Okay, any questions? None. Chris LaBruna?
Good evening, Chris LaBruna, 17122 Phillips Avenue, the property immediately adjacent to the project. First of all, I'd like to say that myself and my wife are very impressed with the architecture of the project. We like the look of it. We also are impressed with the green approach. Our one concern with the project had been privacy. Our entertaining area, as Mr. Jeans had mentioned, is directly adjacent to the side of the house. And since the project has gotten going, we've had several meetings with Mr. Jeans on behalf of his clients, and they have addressed all of our concerns. So the extra trees that you see in the between the two buildings, the planters up in the balcony, we believe obstruct the view of our backyard, so you would not be able to look straight down into our backyard where our pool, our entertaining deck is. So we're in, my wife Brenda and I are in full support of the project, and we would urge the commission to approve it. Thanks.
Okay, Commissioners, any questions? None. All right, thank you. At this time, I will call back up the applicant, Mr. Jeans.
Thank you. I've looked at tree number 30. We don't have a problem keeping that if you want to condition it so. And so one thing that I would like to request is your wholehearted consideration towards approving this project tonight rather than having it come back. And the reason I'm saying that is Los Gatos has not yet got around to looking at how it's going to try to help people go green. And most of the other jurisdictions are starting to look to expedited approvals and things such as that. We've already been bumped 1 month, unfortunately, because of a large project that was on in front of us last time and a vacation period. after that. We want to get this going, especially as we are doing some grading work under the house. We'd like to get this project going before winter sets in. And we feel that we have done just about everything that we can, both in working with the neighbors and also in presenting, I think, an appropriate project for the site, and we hope you will approve it. I will make one last plea for the extended eaves. It was not a requirement by the town architect. It was a recommendation that we reconsider it. We did reconsider it, and we do think it's appropriate. So we would like to retain that feature. We think it can be very elegant. And as I said, we've done it before, and we get nothing but positive comments from people that see the house that we've done it on before.
Thank you, Mr. Jeans, and thank you for your patience on that. Yes, that was a rather long meeting. I think
Luckily, I wasn't
we
there.
appreciate you waiting on this. So getting back to those eaves, the whole idea of of having that eave is for it's an overhang, correct?
Yes, it extends the overhang.
Right. But my
Considerably.
other question for you is, and yet the house is described as a prairie-style influenced design.
Right.
So I see a conflict between prairie and then sort of a Chinese lantern look to the design. And I would only offer that I have a feeling that you probably could get the same overhang and the same kind of shading with using a prairie-style design, to finish the building. It would certainly not conflict with the design element. It would make for a stronger architectural statement, I think. And so I tend to agree in this case with the town architect. I thought that was a very strong recommendation. And so that would be my feeling, but do you have something to add to that? Something to
As I said,
change
it
my
was,
mind?
if you let us go to 26 feet in height, then I can do it more easily. We've got a number of issues. We're trying to use the roof, if you look, as a screen for a balcony, for a railing. And if I have to elevate that more, then I'm going to lose my positive structural connection between the plate and the wall. I have to have a positive structural connection there, which means the rafter needs to sit on the top plate. But if I'm trying to get the eave to extend out 4 feet, I either have to flare it so that I can have the positive structural connection, or I have to extend the roof out in a different way. Excuse me a second. I'm going to pass over to Brad O'Donnell.
I guess since I was commenting also, I asked Joel if it was okay to participate in the rebuttal on that
I
question.
would let it, yes.
Okay. Frank Lloyd Wright invented the prairie style, right, as I'm sure you're aware, and his primary influence, in coming up with that, yes, was the long, flat vistas of the American prairie, but also the the Chicago exhibition of 1893. And he was taken with Japanese and Chinese architecture at that exhibition. I mean, yes, there is a slightly Eastern feel to it, but it's also an integral move in prairie architecture, especially out of the eaves where it is, as low-pitched as that. But you'll find that in some of Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture. It is part of prairie architecture. And I think that if you raise that roof, like Tony said, if you want to go to 26 feet, but you're just going to get a lot more bulk in the roof if you're going to get an eave out there. It's not going to look like a big pagoda sitting up in the hillside. I would take a look at the Wooded View house. It looks terrific.
Well, I'm not going to design your home for you, but because the town architect really made a strong recommendation, we really pay attention to that, and I happen to agree with it.
Okay.
So, thank you, Joe, for clearing it up. Okay, Mr. Jeans, you want to come back up? Thank you. Any other commissioners? Before I have other questions, but I'll let Commissioner Bourgeois.
Thank you for your consideration of tree 30. And I also have another question for you on the trees you're recommending for planting. In the Appendix A of the Hillside Standards, we have recommended tree and shrub list for our hillsides, and your proposed plantings deviates from that. Would you reconsider that, or is there specific justification for the specific species you chose? The Monterey pines, the prunus are not part of the...
We're prepared to eliminate the Monterey pines and replace that. The prunus are already planted.
Trees 81 through 87, I think, are additional fruit trees.
Well, we have some planted.
I'm just looking at the bottom right of sheet C2.
That is a fruit orchard that the owner wants to plant. If you look, that is right in the area adjacent to the pool. They want to have some fruit that they are growing on the property.
Okay. And 55 through 57?
Those are already in place.
They're under new trees.
We've just planted them.
Oh, okay.
We had some available.
And those are in the screening down at the bottom?
We had some available from another property. We didn't want to destroy them. The homeowner didn't want them. We put them there.
But you're willing to change the Monterey pines then?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I will, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I have a question for you. The architect also suggested that the stone that you have proposed for the front of your house be continued up to the eave line, I believe, to make it appear anchored to the ground, which I think is a good idea. And since rock comes from the ground, that would probably really strengthen your design as well. And also, in one of the other reasons is I was wondering if you might even consider extending the rock. I think you're putting it on 3 sides, but you know, we like 360-degree architecture, so I'm wondering if that also could be continued even more. Have you thought about that?
I think we are taking it up to the eave line in all instances. I don't personally like a little short wall.
Right.
Just that looks like trim. So if you look at sheet A5, you'll see on the far right of the top elevation, you see stone. The town architect suggested that we continue that stone on the next area where we've put stucco, but what we've tried to do is have strong stone elements on the sides, and that is shown centrally there. Also, when you go round to the other elevations, you have stone visible. On the one side, you have the stone elements of the pool. On the side facing the rear, you've got the stone element at the garage and up to the second-story eave. I do believe that you've got strength in stone on all sides. We did try to achieve that.
So are you telling me that you're complying with what the town architect had suggested, had directed or recommended to you?
I read into the town architect's comments that if you turn to the top elevation on page A5, he wanted to see stone in the area where that archtop window is.
Yes.
I think that archtop window area balances with the adjacent stucco on the opposite side, and it allows the central arched window element and the front entry, which is to the right, to stand out more significantly. If you feel strongly that that is absolutely necessary, we will do it. I think it does, however, make the building less balanced in the use of stone. I think it makes too strong an element in one area, as opposed to try to blend the stone and stucco as it moves around the house.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'll take that under consideration.
Right.
Then my other question for you was about the I don't know if you call it a trellis or a porte cochere or whatever you're calling it, but it's the, I'm not sure what you're calling it, that goes over the
The trellis over the pool?
The trellis over the pool. I'm calling it a trellis,
Right.
although it looks rather massive to me. Could you explain to me why it's so thick? It adds a lot to the mass of the house, is why I'm asking.
Well, it's long and it's low, and it doesn't impact any of the immediate neighbors. It's set back more than 100 feet from the street. It will barely be visible. The reason it is there is twofold. My client swim a lot, and they want to be able to use that pool. They don't like the concept of melanoma with them or their family, and they want to be able to swim laps. They want to be able to enjoy it. So what we've done is we have taken a trellis, which is going to look, I think, fairly sleek and elegant, and we have relocated our hot water heating, solar hot water heating of the house and the pool onto the trellis area above that in a semi-opaque fashion,
Right.
so that we're actually able to capture the sun and use it without impacting the neighborhood.
Right. Is there any way that the top of it, though, could be made to appear less bulky? It looks a little bulky to me, and I'm thinking that something a little sleeker would probably not, I mean, it would not add so much to the mass of the main house.
We will look to see how we can reduce it to the maximum, absolutely. It was
Okay.
meant to be not a large statement, and we will definitely try to ensure that that is the
Okay.
case.
Thank you, because it looks very.
We'll do the minimum that the structural engineer requires. We won't go beyond that.
Okay, thank you. We'll make note of that. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Jeans. All right, who else has some questions? Mr. Kane, you're thinking, or you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Kane. Commissioner Kane.
Chairperson hates when I pose rhetorical questions. I have to put this in the form of an interrogative. I've heard you talk at length about green and leadership in green and LEED. But you know, in our appendix for Hillside, there's 2 or 3 pages on encouraging people to build greenhouses in the hillsides. The southern exposure, the east-west axis, and that kind of thing, which your house seems to take into consideration. But I get hung up on this green, and you know I get hung up on hillside houses, and you know I get hung up on cellar policy. Your greenhouse would be the second largest house in the entire neighborhood by about 50%. And the only one that's bigger was built prior to the Hillside guidelines. It is tied for first place on FAR. It takes the footprint of the first floor and goes straight down and creates a cellar. I think the cellar mirrors the first floor. And in that sense, it's 3,600 feet for a cellar, 5,500 feet for the residence. You've got a 9,000 square foot greenhouse with a pool. I don't see that as green, and I don't see that as hillside. And I'm not comfortable with telling me that something that big is green and is conscientious, etc. So I'm asking you to help me with the cellar policy, which you know you and I have discussed in the past, that the cellar policy says it shall be in lieu of visible mass. That if we're going to dig down and grade 77 trucks up and down the hills, that we should do it for a higher purpose, and that's to reduce visible mass. And when I look at the house from could be the east side, I see 3 stories. I see a full garage door, I see a full first floor, and I see a full second floor. That's 3 stories to me. I suppose I'm reacting to the emphasis on green when I don't see something that big with a pool, a 3-car garage, and if I may, and she's going to cut me off any second now, so I'm on borrowed time, but if I can get this in, In the basement, we have a 3-car garage, an office, a bedroom, a laundry, a mechanical room, a wine cellar, a Costco room, a workshop, a video arcade, a gym, a game room, and a theater. And on the first floor, we have a sitting room, a piano room, a Coventry, and the other
Commissioner
same
Kane,
room.
Commissioner
It's a
Kane.
question.
Commissioner Kane, I think that Mr. Jeans knows.
Everyone else may not. We've got a bedroom number, may I finish my
I
question?
think they know the square footage, though, says it, okay? It's 30.
I don't see this as hillside, and I don't see it as green. And how come we have, here's a question, how come we have 2 master bedrooms?
Okay,
We
thank you.
have 2 master bedrooms, 2 master baths, 2 master walk-in closets, one on the first floor, one on the second floor. I don't, is there one?
Commissioner Kane, which is the question that you would
Why
like
do we have 2 master bedrooms?
the applicant?
Is that the
to
only
answer?
question?
No, the other one was how do you define that whole thing as green?
Well, we have 2 master bedrooms so that both my owner can live there and so can their parents. They're anticipating that at some stage they will have to provide a facility for their parents, and they want it to be in the house. And they don't think that their parents should lose the ability to have a nice bedroom.
No, nor does anyone, and that's not my issue, even though it's
Well,
not.
you made it an issue.
Even though it's not an immediate issue, you know it's hillside houses. This is not a hillside house. This is a Floor Valley house. It's 9,000 square feet. We've had the discussion, and you know my concerns. I think it's an abuse of the cellar policy as well to have a 4,000-foot cellar and a 5,600-foot house on top of it. Somewhere that's a question.
It fits within the guidelines. If you want to change the guidelines, then that is something that you can do. But we have to work within guidelines that the town has given us. And I don't just mean myself, I mean anyone who's designing a house. We do believe that we fit within the guidelines of Hillside in the way that we have designed the house. We think it steps with the grade at the architectural level, even though we've put in the basement for 2 reasons. As I said, one is to give us structural mass at that fault location. We might have removed some of it if we weren't in that situation, but we are. So it gives us a much stronger integrity to that house to be able to do it like this. It's an unusual situation. I think the town's reasoning for allowing cellars when you have a green house is very valid. I think that this is an opportunity for you to show that you think that the Hillside standards are well written and well argued, and vote to approve this house.
And you know this is a question, and you know we disagree. Because I don't think it steps down the hill. I think it's 3 stories, and I don't think it's a hillside house, and I think it's an abuse of the cellar policy.
Commissioner Kane, are you finished? Thank you. Okay, do we have any other questions of the applicant? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. I'll close the public hearing at this time and turn this over to commission for additional questions of staff, discussion, a motion, and perhaps we need to discuss the cellar policy. We could start there. Commissioner Bourgeois.
I think I can see how the vote's shaping up already just from the questioning, and we'll see in a minute with the discussion. But let me just give you my perspective. You raised some valid points, and you raised some concerns, Commissioner Kane, that we've had with many other projects. The questions as I see them are, does this fall within the Hillside standards with square footage, cellar policy? Yes, it does. It falls inside the outer limits of what we've set, and it meets the standards. Whether we think the cellar policy is correct or not may not matter, because the way it's written now and the way it's been interpreted, this meets that definition. So if you're concerned about the size and shape and massing of the house, I think we have to go to neighborhood compatibility. You brought up neighboring houses, additional FARs. It's a big house, but it's in a neighborhood of big houses, and it's a pretty big lot. Would it be greener if it were smaller? Absolutely. But you know as well as I do that we get houses of this size and bigger all the time that make no attempt to do anything sustainable. And so, by and large, I think this is an excellent project. And so that's where I stand.
Commissioner Rice.
I'll echo what Commissioner Bourgeois said, and to maybe put it a little bit clearer for myself. We get into a conversation of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. And whether we like it or not, I think that the current interpretation of the spirit of the law is closer to the letter of the law right now on seller policies. I don't like it either. Maybe that's a topic for conversation with council. But I agree with Commissioner Bourgeois that it meets the guidelines. And absent some small issues that I think are certainly solvable through conditions, I don't have a problem with this. I think it's a beautiful house. I will speak to the eave issue for a second. I don't think, I'm certainly not competent to get into an architectural discussion, but I trust that architects can have differences of opinion, and if Mr. Jeans feels that this is the best way to achieve what he's trying to achieve from a solar greenhouse certification, I'm not going to get into an argument over whether I think it's more Eastern influence than prairie influence. And is it O'Donnell made a good point. I happen to have been fortunate enough to go through a number of Frank Lloyd Wright houses, and there is a decided Eastern feel to some of his architecture. So with that issue, I have no qualms.
Okay. Commissioner King?
Well, Commissioner Bourgeois, I think what I said was this house is about 50% on average larger than the others, so I don't see how the others are as large. In fact, there's only one other 5,000 square foot house, and it was built before the guidelines in 004. The other houses are 1,800, 3,700, 4,000, 3,200. I don't see it as a neighborhood of big houses, comparatively speaking. This will be the biggest house up there, maybe in total, because I don't know what the other house has in terms of a basement. Given this size of this basement, I doubt that the other one is the same size, but it could be. This is still 9,000 square feet. And if we're going to play just numbers, there's a time we don't play just numbers when we go over the limits and say, well, we can be discredited. I'm just so concerned about our standards, and I'm concerned about the hillsides, that we keep finding ways to approve 5,000, 6,000, 65, 9,000 square feet houses, and that's what we do every 2 weeks, or some of us do, which is approve bigger and bigger houses. It's all about the environment. Shame on you, John. It's all about ecology and conspicuous consumerism. I don't see 9,000 square foot houses where the pool is green. We can put in pipes and electrolytes and things you understand that I don't, but it still comes off to me as big and consumptive of the land and 77 trucks up and down the hill. And I don't think, and you didn't address this, I don't think it steps down the hillside. I think it's a big old, beautiful. Love the house. Love my hillsides more. It's a beautiful house that's just a big old house that sits there. It doesn't step anywhere. It's too big to step. It's a slinky that won't step. It's just giant, and it's there. And if you look at it from the garage side, John, you see Mars Trefetnik's 3 floors. A former commissioner just established what 3 stories looks like, and I think this one looks like that. And I also think, Commissioner Rice, that the seller policy says, and I know you know what it says, to provide hidden square footage in lieu of above-ground visible mass. Now, the above-ground visible mass is a hot-bit away from the maximum allowed. So I don't see that as compatible with the intent of that language. It continues, such policies will help reduce the bulk and mass of the new home. It's a huge, beautiful house. What is it I'm missing? It's a huge, beautiful house that one could argue, abuses the seller policy, takes advantage of language, just twists the word around, and we end up with a giant 9,000 foot square. We can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it anymore. I need guidance that we want 9,000 square foot houses with this interpretation and that twist, and it all comes down to conspicuous consumerism and strains on that delicate environment, which you taught me about. I'm really shocked, John. You taught me about how we need to protect and preserve up there, and that's what I'm trying to do. A wonderful, beautiful house, Mr. Jeans, but you know we disagree on what's a hillside house and what isn't. And I'm stuck there. It's a 3-story house that doesn't step down. And it's a beautiful house.
I haven't said anything yet. I was thinking about saying I don't have to, but probably what had bothered me in the very beginning was the 770 cubic yards of cut and 530 of it, which was going to have to be exported off of the land. We like to keep our land, our ground, our dirt. And I had to weigh, is that excessive? And is the cut to minimize the visibility of this house? And I don't really think that. But I do feel somewhat relieved that at least now we are going to have 550 cubic yards of it that will stay on the site. So I'm feeling a little bit better about it. So now, what am I going to do about the seller? Well, I think we are in a conundrum about how we each interpret the seller policy, and it is up for interpretation. And I haven't made my mind up about that actually right now, so I'm going to be thinking about it. But that's sort of where I'm sitting. There's there's good grading and then there's bad grading, and the good grading is to reduce the visibility. The bad grading is just because you want what you want, and you want that seller. So I have to think about it. As far as stepping down the hillside, the site is not that. It's I don't want to call it flat, but it's not a very large degreed slope. So I'm not sure. I mean, just to cut into the earth to make it step down the hillside would be rather erroneous. So with that, I'm going to be thinking about it. And if I have any commissioners that would like to make more comments or a motion, we could entertain that. As far as the architecture and the Chinese kind of lantern, I would agree that Frank Lloyd Wright did incorporate a lot of Asian aspects into his homes. I think this is a little peculiar only because it's the only element of Asian on the house. So the house is totally prairie, and then we just flared up. It looks a little odd to me. However, maybe it's personal choice. If you can still accomplish the solar, the solarness or the green part of what you're trying to do, perhaps we should ignore. I don't know how I was saying that, but anyway, I'm sure John will, or Mr. Bourgeois will correct me. And I think I'm going to think about it, but that's my comments so far. Commissioner Rice.
One of the things I'd like to suggest and might assuage one of your fears with regards to the off-siting of materials is maybe we can set a maximum amount to be exported, but as a condition to work with either the engineering department or the director of community development to minimize export, rather than saying we're going to take 250 yards off if it works out that he can take 230 yards or 200 yards, because after they start spreading the dirt, maybe that works, and I would just condition it with a maximum removal with them to work to minimize it.
Could I comment back to you? And could we perhaps think about offering also a condition that might say to look at reducing some of the cellar if it's at all possible? And I don't want to, I just think about it. I mean, to ease the idea of cutting and filling and everything. I mean, you never know.
If I may respond,
yes.
That can can still achieve what they need to achieve structurally. I don't want to get into
Right, I don't want to, yes.
that.
Commissioner Kane?
Yeah, I want to say something about the concept I've heard over the past couple of months of export. And you know, the Hillside Guidelines, I don't think they talk about export per se. They talk about cutting and ripping and tearing and filling. And nothing in here says if you only export 2 trucks and put the rest of the dirt all over the land and create 85 flat pads, then that's okay. I don't want us to get lulled into a misinterpretation of site planning, Section 3 of the guidelines, because it's not about dig a hole and put the dirt over here, because then you've got a flat pad which is prohibited specifically by other sections of the. So it's really all about the cut itself, the fill itself, and the number of trucks going up and down the hills. And there's no encouragement in here whatsoever, unless I'm wrong, and I'll defer to staff, that if you start spreading dirt all over your property, then it's okay to dig 65 holes. I don't want to get lulled into that's okay to do, because in the hillsides, it should always affect the contour, and we're prohibited from doing that. We're prohibited from making elective cuts. In fact, I don't even know where pools fall through the cracks, because the cutting that's done is supposed to be for the footprint of the house, and it goes to what someone said under the heading of necessity as opposed to elective. So I appreciate the common sense approach to it, and I guess the word we used earlier was de minimis. If it was just a little bit of dirt, not really to affect approval or disapproval, but just common sense, that would be fine. But certainly not anything to make the cutting sound more attractive or in any way jeopardize the contour of the land.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Kane. We'll listen to that. And Commissioner Bourgeois.
I agree with Commissioner Kane's comments about grading. However, I also think that not all hillside sites are created equal. This one already has an existing flat pad, and if we can reduce the large truck traffic almost in half by adding 6 inches to that flat pad, I think that's why we review these on a case-by-case basis. And I think in this case, it makes sense. I agree that in general we don't want to start doing that as a rule, but I think here it's too logical of an answer to not consider. I'd like to tell you that I do see stepping with this house. The slopes are pretty gentle across most of this, but if you look at the west elevation, there's a slight grade and there's a slight stepping. If you also look at the north elevation, there's also a stepping. So I see it stepping. Also, the cellar policy. You know, I'm on the same page with you on the cellar policy, but it's in lieu of visible mass. And so to me, if the house appears too massive, then that's when you have an issue if it's coming up above grade. To my opinion, when I drive the neighborhood and I look at the adjacent houses, this one does not appear too massive in the context of the neighborhood, in the context of the site. And so that's why I don't have as much of a problem as you do on that issue. I'm going to make a motion in a second, but I'd like to address, because there are a few things that we're supposed to grant exceptions to.
Yes, I was going to ask us.
There are 2 trees that the arborist recommended they save, and they're asking for removal. I agree with the applicant that it is appropriate for both of those trees to come out. Neither of those trees are native trees. They don't belong on our hillsides, and they're planting with the native oak woodland species. So I am okay with tree 19 and tree 38 coming out. As far as the architectural considerations, I think, in my opinion, these are minor design issues that are a matter of personal taste. And I think if someone's going this far to get LEED Gold certification, I'm willing to grant them minor, to me, these are not deal breakers. So I'm fine with them not adhering to the consulting architect's conditions 4 and 5. So I'm going to make a motion to approve architecture and site application S-05-151. I'll make the findings that this project is categorically exempt under CEQA and that it is in substantial compliance with the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines. I would like to add the additional conditions. First, that tree number 30 will remain a part of the project. The landscaping plan will be revised to remove the Monterey pines and replace them with trees as per Appendix A of the Hillside Standards, and that a minimum of an additional 350 cubic yards will remain on site per approval of the Director of Community Development.
I'll second it.
Okay, Commissioners, I have a motion and a second to approve with the condition, to approve this application with the conditions that tree 30 remain, landscaping plan be revised, and the minimum 350 cubic yard cut remain on site. Do we have a discussion about that?
Madam Chair.
Oh, yes, Commissioner, Mr. Suda.
For clarification to the maker of the motion, would you also like to include the revised drawings that were submitted tonight?
Yes,
Sheet
please.
C2
Thank you.
and A6?
Yes, thank you.
That's fine.
The motion maker and the seconder agreed to that. Okay, thank you very much.
Could I have one follow-up before we
Yes,
go
you
on to
can.
discussion? Is there any way that we can follow up with their LEED certification? Any way to confirm that they did indeed achieve LEED Gold? I don't know if that's something we can do.
You could have the applicant submit a memorandum providing information on their efforts to achieve that certification prior to building permit and prior to certificate of occupancy.
I would like to add that. I don't want people to come in here and promise us the world and not follow through. So, thank you.
That's fine with me as well.
Okay, Commissioner Kane.
In the form of constructive and respectful debate, Commissioner Bourgeois, when you say that you see this house stepping down the hillside, does that mean you also see the 3 stories? And do you have an example of 3 stories in our hillside guidelines?
I do see what you mean by the appearance of a 3-story element. And no.
No, there's no example of a 3-story step down in the guidelines. Is that what you meant? Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Bourgeois, I have a question for you about the motion. You commented before that we look at applications on a, application by application kind of format. So, and you are looking at the seller in this case. Would you please repeat that? I mean, why is this different?
Because I don't think the bulk and mass of this house are out of context for the site or the neighborhood. So it's in lieu of visible mass. And to me, so by the book, it doesn't apply to the FAR because it's under 4 feet. Some of it is above grade. So if that is contributing to the house appearing more massive, standing out in the neighborhood, then I would be opposed to it. But when I look at this neighborhood and I look at this house on this site, the way it's tucked in, I don't feel that way. So I do not think, even though it is above grade, I don't think the bulk and mass of the house is such as much of a concern.
Okay, I wanted to hear that again. Would the maker, then would you as the maker of the motion, as soon as I'm finished, as the maker of the motion, would you also put in the condition, I believe that the applicant said he would look at it, to relook at redesigning the trellis to reduce the bulkiness? And the applicant did say that he would do that.
So you're asking them to just look at reducing?
No, to redesign it if they can do that, to make it less bulky looking, because that definitely, for me, adds to the mass of this house as I see it. And I think
Commissioner Rice has a comment he'd like to.
If you're asking, the applicant's comment was he would make it the minimum structure that would be
Yes.
structurally sound.
Exactly, that.
If you want that as a condition.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And I would be fine with
Those
that as
words.
well.
Thank
Yes,
you,
thank you.
Thank you for having a great memory like that. Appreciate it. Okay. Okay, Commissioner Bourgeois, you.
I do have an answer for Commissioner Kane's question. On page 36 of the Hillside Standards, there is a cross-section, and if you look at it head-on, it would give the appearance of 3 stories. So it took me a second, but I found it for you. And it gives that appearance because it's stepping down.
If you look at it from this side.
You have the same page 36
Yeah.
as I do? I see 2 stories. I mean, the garage is missing, you know, the third, okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're, commissioners
Put a
are
dormer by
looking
the
at
attic and you got your 3rd story.
the hillside design guidelines. Yes, Commissioner Kane, you would like to
Commissioner
respond?
Bourgeois, just to put it on record and to continue this discussion, because we may get somewhere with it. Hang on, Steve. The cellar policy, when it says in lieu of visible additional mass, and we realize that this house is already close to maximum, so it's not reducing anything that couldn't be there anyway. If it wants to reduce mass, it could be 5,000 with a 2,000 cellar, then you got a 3,000 house, then you've reduced something. If you're right up against 6,000, you can't go any further. I don't see what visible anything is being reduced, but we need to get the policy clarified. I'll certainly
I agree.
with that.
I agree with you on that. I think the
think-
cellar policy should be
Okay.
used to
We've
reduce the
created-
above ground
we found ways
mass.
to
Thank
make
you.
9,000 square foot
Thank you,
houses,
Commissioners.
and we have a maker of the policy in the audience, and that was not the intent of the policy.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioners, and that is something we will discuss in detail, I'm sure, at some point. Before I call the motion, I did think about the cellar, and we don't have problems with cellars, especially for a house, you know, of this size. My problem really was with the cut and with the exporting that would have to be done. I'm convinced now that we can keep more of our dirt on the site. I'm not so sure that this site wasn't already graded when you inherited it. So I have to say that I'm not sure that we're really, you know, we're not going to lose anything with that. So, and because you will accept the condition about the trellis, I will support the motion. So with that, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Opposed.
Okay. That's 3-1. Motion carries.
Appeal rights. This decision may be appealed to the town council. Any appeal must be filed in writing with the town clerk's office within 10 working days. Appeal forms are available in the town clerk's office, and there is a fee for filing an appeal.
Thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute break, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to begin our next item, which is, let me get to it. Which is 21, excuse me, Commissioners. Thank you. 21 Mariposa Avenue. It's a minor residential application, MR-06-30. It's requesting approval to construct a second-story addition to a pre-1941 single-family residence on property zoned R-1D. APN is 410-14-010. Property owner applicant is Richard Gaitis. And Mr. Paulson, you were the planner on that. Would you like to introduce it? Thank you.
The applicant's requesting approval of a minor residential application to construct a 235-square-foot first-story addition, 878-square-foot second-story, and a 789-square-foot garage. The resulting two-story residence will be 2,510 square feet with a 789-square-foot garage. The parcel size is 9,198 square feet. The allowed floor area for this site is 2,910 square feet for the home and 812 square feet for a garage. The maximum height of the proposed residence is 24 feet. The exterior materials will match the existing home and will consist of stucco, wood, window, and door details, and a composition shingle roof. The Director of Community Development has the authority to approve minor residential applications if the project complies with town development standards and there's no objections filed during the 10-day noticing period. Notice of pending approval was sent on March 9th to the abutting neighbors. The town received a letter expressing concerns for the proposed project from the property owners at 19 Mariposa Avenue. Staff met with the applicant and neighbor to discuss the proposed project in detail. And since the issues were unable to be resolved, the application has been referred to the Planning Commission pursuant to town code.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paulson. Would the applicant please come up? Oh, do we have a question of staff? Oh, we have two questions of staff. Go ahead and stand at the podium, and I'll open the public hearing in a minute. Okay, Commissioner Kane was first, and then Commissioner Bourgeois.
Just to get it on record, and I think staff can help me with this, one of our findings is that we, as required by Section 15303 of the State Environmental Guidelines, as adopted by the town, that this project is categorically exempt. Now, we find that language on most of the applications that come before us, 15301 or 15303, and that's a finding I cannot make. And that's a first for me, is reading those guidelines tightly. And I took that to staff to say, educate me on whether or not this does. And I think they were thinking about changing 301 to 303, or which way do we go on that, Mr. Suda?
Actually, 01 or 03 would work. 15303 is new construction of small structures, and it states that it applies to single-family residences. 15301 is a categorical exemption for expansion of existing facilities for areas in which there are urban services, and it complies with the general plan. It allows for structures up to an addition of up to 10,000 square feet.
Well, that's one of the findings. I think that's C. B, which precedes it, says, as long as the expansion is not more than 50% of what's currently there. And you educated me on that there's another way to read that, or there's more compelling language that precedes it.
The way it reads, it's an or. So Section 1 of that 15301 states 50%, well, let me back up. The section starts by saying addition to existing structures, provided that the addition will not result in an increase of more than 50% of the floor area before the addition, or 2,500 square feet, whichever is less, or 10,000 square feet if the project is in an area where all public services are available, and the development is permissible in the general plan, and B, the area in which the project is located is not environmentally sensitive.
Okay, so my reading that B doesn't comply with B is correct insofar as it is more than 50%, but the C takes precedent because it's under 10,000.
Correct.
Now, may I say through the chair that this goes back to a request from Commissioner Bourgeois that we get schooling on CEQA. And what I'm asking for, and I'll bring it up in the commission matters later, is we get a simple 8.5 by 11 on 301 and 303, because we see them every week, and I'm not sure that, I know at least I'm not clear on it, and I don't know if everyone else is. But it's staff's opinion that this is categorically exempt under Class 1?
15301, Section
Class 1 exemption.
E2. E2. 2 is the 10,000 square foot exemption.
And that's Class 1? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Bourgeois, do you still have a question? Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't find very easily the existing height of the existing home and the existing garage. So I don't know, maybe that might be better for the applicant, but okay, thanks.
I thought it was on the plan, but we can ask the applicant.
It probably is, I just missed
Okay.
it.
All right, so we have the applicant, and would you like to introduce yourself? State your address for the record, name and
Yes,
address. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rick Gaitis. I'm the applicant and the homeowner, and I reside at 21 Mariposa, the subject site. And thank you this evening for hearing our proposed project. A couple things is we've gone through some extensive meetings with the planners, several planners throughout the process. And I also would like to say, I hope we submitted some correspondence and some justification letters along with our submittal package, and I hope you had the opportunity to read them. And another letter subsequent to this particular meeting addressing the results of our meetings with our neighbors in regard to that. And we've done our due diligence and meeting as many of our neighbors as we can and discussing our project and alerting them of what's going on. And we have a general support from everybody except the one person who sent the letter that triggered this particular hearing. And also I'd like to point out that we also went before the Historic Committee and had several requests by the Historic Committee to do some minor revisions. And it was looked at pretty carefully during that particular process, and we got a vote of approval from the Historic Committee also. A couple things I'd like to point out in reviewing our plans, and I hope you all have had the opportunity to go out and look at the pole frame itself, or the story pole on the site, because the elevations that you see in the plans are long and extended. It's a very narrow lot, 50 feet wide and 183 feet deep. And the development tends to want to follow the length of the lot. And we have done that in the way we have cited the particular structure. But in looking at the elevations that are presented, the actual building itself looks very long and very exposed, and it's a view that would never be seen in real life. From the side of from the right-hand side, the uphill side, much of that view would be screened, and it's foreshortened very tightly by the narrow corridor of vision on the uphill side. And on the downhill side, it's also screened by the existing structure. So in order to perceive this structure, you'd have to walk down the driveway, and as you come around the corner of the house, then you would see it. So perceiving the whole thing in elevation as we see it on the plan would never occur in real life. And that was taken into consideration in the planning of the structure itself. And part of the goals is to not touch or not exaggerate the existing structure, which is a historic structure, to keep its small house character in the streetscape, which we have done, and push the development behind the house so that it's virtually unseen, but just by small parts. If you were to look at the rendering on page A2, down in the corner, you could see a small part of the second story sticking out behind the outside. And if you're out on the street, this is all you would see from that particular area. So I think we've achieved a real good goal in meeting the requirements with minimal impact to the public and the surrounding streetscape and the general neighbors, except for our direct adjacent neighbors. They're the ones that are most affected. And most affected is the uphill neighbor to our right, who shares the backyard to our structure in that area. And we reviewed the project with him, and he is fine with the project and has no issues, and would be here tonight in support if we would have requested it. And also, in placing the structure, we sited it right next to his existing large garage, which actually screens that structure elevation in reality. So when you view it from his particular site, it is screened by his own garage. So it becomes very unobtrusive in its from that particular viewing. So we sited the project to this west side on the uphill side, so that the downhill side of our southerly neighbor, who had the letter of objection, is furthest away from their property, being on that side. And if you observe the shadow casting plan that we've provided, none of the shadows affect that southerly piece of property. So in effect, I think we've done a good job at keeping our distance and minimizing the effect of the two stories in that area. And also, if you look at this little site plan we proposed, is that the adjacent neighbor to the south is the one that had the objections to the particular site.
Would you please go ahead and finish your sentence, and would you finish your thought? Thank you.
Okay. And I would just like to point out that the new structure is halfway past the rear property line of the adjacent neighbors. So it's pushed back further and less impact upon that southerly piece of property. But what I'd like to do is, of course, field any questions that you may have in regard to any further.
Thank you very much. And for your information, I'd like to have my fellow commissioners also let us know if you visited the site. But I visited both 21 Mariposa and the adjacent neighbor, the downhill neighbor, 19, and I visited number 19 as well. Would the rest of the commissioners, when you speak or ask questions, weigh in on that too? Thank you. No, please stay there. Well, I'm sure we have some questions for you.
Great, thank you.
And thank you for your letter of the evolution of your project. It was quite complete. But have you met with your neighbors since this time?
No, we haven't.
Have not met.
We had one meeting at the city Joel arranged and at the town here, and then we conversed, but there was no resolution from that meeting.
Okay, thank you. So do we have any questions of the commissioners at this time? Commissioner Bourgeois?
I guess I'll start by commenting I did visit the site. I knocked, no one was home. I walked down the driveway. Hope that was okay.
Sure. Well,
And I do have a question about the existing height of your home and the existing height of the garage. Do you know those offhand?
I would believe I don't have it on here, but the garage itself isn't that high. It's probably around 13 feet.
Okay, but you're just...
And the house itself is around 19 to 20.
So you're just estimating, though? You don't,
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I have a question of staff, but I can ask that in a minute. We have no other questions at this time? Okay, thank you. We will call you back up. I do have several speaker cards, and we'll call you up after that. Talk to us. I have a question of staff, though, first. Regarding the shadow study, was that checked by staff? I mean, is there a way, I mean, do we do our own calculations for shadows? I'm sorry?
We do not do our own calculations for shadows.
Okay, so this is what we have. Okay, thank you. Did anyone else have a question of staff before we move on? Seeing none. Okay, I'll open the public hearing then for the audience. And the first person up is Mary Lou Fall. And she would be followed by Thomas C. Fall. So why don't you sort of position yourself?
Hello, my name is Mary Lou Fall, and I live at 19 Mariposa Avenue. I would like to now address the proposed recommendations made by the staff on March 9th, 2007, and why they will not work. The use of obscure glass for the proposed second-story windows will not satisfy the privacy issues. How much privacy does an open window with obscure glass provide? If we can see a window, psychologically we feel we are being observed. The increase of height to the existing fence would create a huge wall that would make us feel like prisoners in our own backyard and would obstruct our view. To us, the view is a matter of great importance and a part of our lives. If you have those pictures, or you can see here, please refer to the last page of the photos where the Westerly Mountains would be blocked with the proposed construction. Also, while looking at those photos, on page 1, it shows photos taken from inside our house, the master bedroom and bathroom, and outside our back door. Our blinds and windows would have to remain closed to maintain a comfortable level of privacy. The remaining photographs were taken in various locations around the backyard. As you can see, there is nowhere in our backyard to escape this looming structure that would envelop our lives and control our lifestyle. The existence of the proposed structure would force us to modify our current behavior to maintain our privacy because we would feel as if we were being constantly monitored. This allows our neighbors, however, unintentionally, to have power over our minds, bodies, and activities. According to our Fourth Amendment right as Americans, we are entitled to our reasonable expectation of privacy in our own homes. This is why the police have to have a warrant to search our homes. This addition invalidates our right to privacy and therefore our rights as tax-paying American citizens. According to our Bill of Rights, we are entitled to the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. Repeatedly, over the past 40 years, the Supreme Court has found that privacy is a fundamental right of the individual. In the 1967 federal case, U.S. versus Katz, the Supreme Court ruled that the Fourth Amendment protects people, not just places. Therefore, the rights of any individual may not be violated, regardless of whether or not there is a physical intrusion into any given area. We are also protected as citizens of the world. Article 12 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. Therefore, as a governing body, the Planning Commission is obligated to legislate in favor of our privacy rights. Thank you.
Okay, whoops. You want to stay there in case we have some questions?
sure.
Does anyone have questions? Seeing none. Okay. Commissioner Rice.
Commissioner Kane and I were on the Historic Preservation Committee. Maybe this is a question for staff. Do neighbors get notified on those meetings?
No.
So the first time they would have heard about this would have been for when it was coming after historic.
After historic and during the minor res process.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bourgeois.
In what I believe is the last letter I have from the applicant, he talks about being willing to design, pay for, install some sort of screening.
That probably was the height of the fence.
Yeah. Is that acceptable to you, not acceptable to you? Why not?
Because the fence already is 9 feet on our side, 6 feet on their side, which is there. That would just raise it even more. That's still going to block our view even more than what we already have. Also, I'm looking at the design of what we already have there. There is this particular design. I also don't believe it would be aesthetically pleasing to either side of what an extent. I mean, how high would the extension be? 20 feet? How high are we going to go?
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question, and then Commissioner Kane has a question. Would, in fact, I have two questions, three actually. So would, going along with what Commissioner Bourgeois said, if it's not a fence, would planting of trees or hedges work for you at all in some regard?
Actually, I think that Dr. Thomas Fall, my husband, will be addressing options. We have drawings.
Okay, someone's to follow this.
That will be addressed.
So I just want to make sure now, your concern is for, if I have this right, is just, I'm going to just paraphrase what you're saying, is just enjoying your current backyard without, and it's a privacy issue?
Privacy issue? Mhm.
Okay. Is there something I missed, or are there other concerns?
There are other concerns that that we addressed in our letter, but because we only have 3 minutes.
But would you please tell me now what they
Privacy.
are? Privacy is
Privacy.
your main concern?
Privacy.
Okay. How about loss of light or concern about shadows?
I would have to do, if we were to have the recommendation of this high fence, yes, it would have shadowed our yard even more than what we have now.
Okay.
So I am concerned with shadow in our backyard also, and that's why I'm really not looking at extending this fence. It's already
How do you
9
can I just ask you, how do you characterize the time you do spend in your backyard? I was there and I noticed it had a lot of trees anyway, but how do you spend your time back there?
Well, we did have a swimming pool that we used quite regularly, but we are going to be redoing our backyard. So our house is small, so we have to look to places to enjoy when we get a little too claustrophobic. So our backyard is a main focus of our life. We enjoy barbecuing. When you live in a small house, you have to look for all the free space you've got.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do I have any other questions? No. Oh, Commissioner Kane, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Mrs. Fall, I read the applicant's letter, which in our packet, hopefully in your packet, is Exhibit C, and your response of March 14th, which is Exhibit D,
Yes,
which included the pictures you're showing us tonight.
correct.
And then I also read the applicant's response to your letter, which was a response to their letter, and they seemingly, they've proposed some considerate accommodation solutions to your concerns. And I guess you're saying that is it the case that you're saying this letter from them does not address your privacy issues?
I don't believe the obscure glass in the windows and adding additional height to our existing fence
We have had cases in the past of elevated houses and windows, and we have used the elevated windows. What do we call those, Mr. Suter? Transits?
Clear story windows.
Okay, thank you.
What I also feel
And we've also used translucent glass to try and compromise between the rights of both parties.
Exactly. But I don't know if anyone's taking into consideration that they're already 3 feet higher than we are in elevation. And that is, I think, a major consideration. Regarding the windows, I understand what you're saying about the glass, but if a window's there and someone is already 3 feet higher in elevation than you are, whether there's obscure glass or not, that window can be opened. That window, I mean, you're still exposed. You can still be seen.
Well, what they said in their letter was they would put them such that their eye level could not see down. And that, to me, sounded like they were surrendering a lot of...
And how, okay, so how would that also...
When they were working at their tables.
Yeah. Do you want to...
Well, wait a minute, wait.
So
Would you just please answer the question? Thank you.
I know that that's what they've offered, but we are willing to negotiate, but I think we do have a real problem with the windows being able to look down on us.
I want to ask you one other
Sure.
difficult question so I can resolve how this is written. The staff report says that with respect to your view concerns, which are often very important to us, and we have language to support compromise regarding obstructed views, Mr. Paulson indicated that he attempted to create a meeting between you and he where he would come and look at the potential loss of the view site. And the report says the neighbors stated they did not believe a site visit to their property was necessary.
That's correct.
Did you sort of tell them not to come out?
Yes, I did, because at that time, I had trust issues regarding the planning department's ability to be objective because of Mr. Gaitis' relationship with the planning department, because of the line of work that he's in, and also knowing that there were people on the historical preservation committee that Mr. Gaitis has a relationship with, even though I know that that was checked with the town attorney. So I was reluctant because I asked Mr. Paulson at that time, was that a normal procedure for him to come out, because he wanted to take pictures, but I had already provided pictures, so I didn't quite understand the necessary need. And so at that time we did have a conversation, and I said, is this necessary? Is this a part of normal procedure? And I never really did get an answer.
Okay.
So it wasn't to be, I don't know, not cooperative. I just was curious.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very...
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I'll call Thomas Fall. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to us. I'm Thomas Fall at 19 Mariposa Avenue. I would like to address the issue at hand relating to the construction of the second-story addition to a pre-1941 single-family residence. First, if a second-story addition is granted, given that it's going to put it higher than the current roof line, I would say that this decision would set a precedent that would be described as a slippery slope. A little is given here, next time more is taken, and by the time you're finished, it's all downhill. And essentially, this guideline would become meaningless, and the history of Los Gatos will disappear. This also begs the question of why this is enforced for some and not for others. Basically speaking, this is a violation of the 14th Amendment that entitles us all to equal protection under law. The same constitutional amendment addresses another possible argument that could be used in favor of this addition. Some would contend that having foliage that borders a property line or trees on our property that are in front of our bedroom window can be used to allow this second-story addition. In other words, that they would be screening. However, this is not the case. As individuals, we're entitled to privacy the year around. There's at least 4 months of the year when there's no foliage on these trees, and these windows would be extremely apparent, as the photos show from just about every place on our backyard. And the other thing is that we do have a couple of major deciduous trees, but the thing is that particularly one of them, it's not that healthy, and if it dies, then we can't come back and redo the decision that had been based on its existence. And if we do have to get rid of the tree, if we make a decision regarding it, it's unfair because essentially we're going to be in a no-win position. So according to the 14th Amendment, the rights of every individual must be equally protected, and so essentially you can't really legislate in favor of one person's preference to the detriment of another person's fundamental right to privacy. And in reference to our meeting with Associate Planner Joel Paulson and the property owners of 21 Mariposa, at that time we presented some drawings that are a viable option, but by no means did we claim that they were a solution. Those drawings are not in your packet, and I would like to present them now. There's a couple of packages. Again, these are not, they're viable solutions. We're not saying that they're viable options, but we're not saying that these are necessarily the solution. But what we are saying is that there are a lot of solutions that could have been explored, and that we would like to have solutions explored that are not as detrimental to our right to privacy.
Okay, just a minute. Would the record please show that additional plans were handed out to the commission? And would you please, do you have this in your hand? I'm going to ask you to please put it up on the overhead so that we can see it. Okay, thank you. Why don't you have one of those? And yeah, just a minute. And then I'm going to ask you to quickly just explain it, because it falls under my question to you, which is, what would make you happy?
Okay. Let me just say is that we've got on here we've kind of.
Excuse me, would you please take the mic? And Commissioner McCain, you had a question?
Doctor, do we have a copy for the applicant, or have they seen these previously?
Not this particular set.
Can we share one with the applicant?
Okay.
Well, that's why I had it put on the overhead, because we can see it there. Thank you.
Okay. Essentially, what happens here is we've got like two possibilities on this sheet, and on this one here, essentially what's happened is that what is the upstairs area currently on the second-story addition is now down here on the ground level, and what has happened is that the garage has been moved to the back of the lot, and then there's a driveway that leads up to that. So essentially, the thing is that the issues with the turning radius are going to be pretty much the same, and this redwood tree is preserved. Another solution is that that the garage, and one of the things that they had said was that they wanted to do is they wanted to have this additional upstairs space for studios. And so another one is to essentially to leave the garage where it is, and then to site the studio as a separate building in a portion of the property where it has minimum interference on the trees. Now again, we're not saying that these are the solutions, but the thing is that there are a universe of things that could have been explored that and our privacy was essentially not considered as part of the cost utility trade-off metrics. And so essentially what we want is we would like to see a bigger exploration that takes our privacy into higher consideration.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Any other questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. What? Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Citizen Ray.
Yes, I wanted to speak to this issue from the standpoint of consideration by you folks that is demanded by our general plan, okay? Whenever you get pop-up architecture, and this is the essence of pop-up architecture in an already existing neighborhood, the FARs bought their property relying on what they saw when they bought, okay? And any intrusion by a neighbor with a remodel must be supported by the town documents, the general plan, and all the appropriate zoning comments and so forth, okay? And as you know, privacy is always a huge issue whenever there's a pop-up architecture to an existing neighborhood. And you have the responsibilities to see that the people that are being potentially abused are disabused based on the town policies for privacy, the general plan, plenty of language. And the FARs evidently don't know a thing about it. But you do, and you need to speak for them, okay? And I know it, okay? Also, on the matter of the view, you know the general plan says that any pop-up architecture or whatever that comes along must share equitably the view with the existing neighbor, okay? And what I hear, there's no attempt by the applicant to share equitably. So it's your duty, ladies and gentlemen, to see that the FARs are protected as far as public documentation. Lastly, we all know that trees used for screening are disallowed in the public documentation of the town for the very good reason that a 50-year-old tree can be down in an hour if somebody decides to do so. And so trees just don't work from a common sense standpoint. You know that, but the main thing is the town documents say ignore trees for screening, basically, okay? So those are my comments in the public interest, and I think, and I know in the past you have paid attention to those matters beautifully, so I urge you to continue to do so.
Thank you, Citizen Ray. Any questions? None. Okay. So my next speaker card is for Alan T. Butler, followed by Melissa Fall. If you could kind of get yourselves ready, that would be helpful for us. And followed by Greg Ebinger, thank you. And then lastly by Lee Quintana.
Good evening. My name's Alan Butler. I live at 13 Mariposa, and the project is visible from my backyard. I'm one door down from I'm one property removed from the applicant. I'm the easterly neighbor of Dr. Fall. I didn't raise an objection to the project, but since you've scheduled this meeting, I've got a few observations for your consideration. There are additions over garages in the neighborhood, but usually I think all of them, the garage is separate from the main structure. Here, what the applicant has done is taken a fairly large garage, turned it sideways, added a second story, and attached it to the structure, and you have this elevation that you see here. From the street, it's a bit more acceptable, but it's pretty ugly from the side. And the comment that it really doesn't matter, you know, your neighbors can't see it from the side, and as long as it's okay from the street, doesn't carry that much weight with me. It rather reminds me of the Hollywood approach to movie sets, where you just put something up and you can't see what's behind them. So having said that, one sees the structure, which is almost 100 feet long, with a very large piece stuck on the back of it. The options, you know, there are options here, which Dr. Fall has just mentioned, and one of them would be to separate the garage, and it loosens up the design quite considerably. And what it does is it lowers the back part to a single story. And again, I'm maybe re-emphasize what he's said, that doesn't seem to have been addressed. And you know, in fairness to the process, one goes through this process to get the best out of a design. And you really should kick it back and say, let's take a look at that. At the end of the day, the applicant, you know, within his rights, might insist on his two-story extension. But you never know, something might come out of that further consideration, which everyone will like, including my neighbors above me and including the applicant. So I urge you to put it back to staff and take a second look at what they're doing and see if they can make it a bit prettier from the side. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you please stay there, Mr. Butler? I think someone has a question for you. Commissioner Bourgeois.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad you're here, because when I saw the alternatives, my first thought was, what are the rear neighbors going to think if we're reducing impact here and we're moving the garage or the art studio to the back of the property? There's some substantial trees back there, 2 70-inch diameter cedars and an over 100-inch redwood. I mean, as a rear adjacent neighbor, how would you see removal of those trees?
I think with a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? Detailed thought in how the garage and workshop is planned. You can recess the corners. You can probably keep the trees. I think the applicant will tell you that, you know, any alternative is going to require the removal of all the trees, and you're going to have to pave the site over. I don't think that's the case. I think you could probably do the alternative by removing one tree. And the arborist's report, or the arborist comments that I saw, said there are 6 trees, protected trees on the property, and you can remove 3 of them. But I actually think you can probably get away with one tree. It depends on how you articulate that garage when it's separate.
And how do you feel, I'm sorry if I may follow up, how do you feel about the removal of such a significant tree as a visual impact to the rear neighbors?
I don't think that I think that the garage can be set away from those 2 back trees to keep the 2 which are on the back of the lot there. I mean, at the moment, what you have planned, what the applicant's got planned, is a standard width garage with another 10 feet added onto it for a workshop. So you've got a 32-foot wide garage. Most garages are 22 feet wide. So if you sort of say, well, okay, let's do a 22-foot wide garage, you can sit it on the back of that site and leave all the trees there, which is part of the considerations that might go into this. You know, that could be things that could be considered when you're taking a second look at it. Because no one's looked at this, and you're asking me questions. I'm not a designer, and I'm just throwing out thoughts.
I'm not asking you to design. I'm just asking, if we have to take out those big trees to put a garage, as a rear-facing neighbor, that's an impact to you, and I just want your reaction to that.
Well, my reaction would be that, you know, you look at it and try and keep them. And at the moment, no one has looked at it with that in mind. So that's my action. I mean, obviously, yes, it's not a good idea. I mean, I'll grant you that completely.
So, Mr. Butler, along that line of thought, I have no idea. I haven't really studied this idea, but of the new plan. But you're the rear neighbor.
No, on the site, I'm 13 Mariposa.
Oh, you're
so
okay.
I'm the neighbor
next
to
who
one.
Right, John. Who is the?
I misunderstood him. I thought he was.
No, I'm one property removed.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Down the slope.
Yeah.
So
It was my mistake.
I'm looking up and I can see basically that elevation around the other way, but it's hidden by the fence and things like that. So.
Okay. So thank you. All right, then I don't have a question for you. All right, thank you. Could we have Melissa Fall, please?
Hello, I'm Melissa Fall. I'm a resident at 19 Mariposa Avenue. I'm going to keep my comments as brief as possible because I believe a lot of the issues have been fairly touched upon by both my parents and Mr. Butler. However, I would like to say I am not well versed in planning ordinances, issues for the planning committee, but I do know my rights as an American. And I would say that we do have a fundamental right to privacy, but nowhere in the Constitution does it state that we have a right to build two-story homes that invade other people's privacy. Additionally, I would say I believe the two-story, as mentioned in the plans, is an art studio. I'm sure you know that artists use paint. To use paint, you have to have adequate ventilation for promoting health, things like that. Those windows would, for the most part, be open. Additionally, there may be some sort of discussion about the eye line. However, if they're sitting, perhaps their eye line would not look into our yard, but if they stand up, I can assure you they would be able to see a portion of our yard. I don't believe that we should have to change our behavior because they want a second story. We shouldn't have to not have barbecues, not have our friends over, not have our curtains drawn because they want a second story. My issue is not that they shouldn't be able to enjoy their space and enjoy their home. My issue is simply that I'll probably be living here for quite a while, and I would like to enjoy my home too. And I really urge you to consider our rights equally, and really please uphold those rights when making this decision. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Fall? Seeing none, thank you. I'll call the next speaker, and that's Greg Ebinger.
Good afternoon. I live at 20 Mariposa, directly across the street from the Guydises. I've been there approximately 2.5 years. I'm a relatively new neighbor. But in the close proximity of the property in question, there are a number of two-story properties currently in existence. Some, I don't know when the additions were done. Personally, I live in a single story myself and live directly next to a two-story property. And I think it's unfortunate, but it is a fact of life that when the properties were built, they were built on a hill. And the lowest property is going down to the easterly, going up to the higher property to the west. I'm friends with both neighbors. It's difficult to come here and take sides. It's not a question of really taking sides. It's a question of what really is taking place in our community in Mariposa. It's a sign of the times that second-story properties have been going up and are continuing to go up on Mariposa. There's currently one under construction down at the end of Mariposa. And frankly, I'm for the project, although I'm not affected as directly because from my sight line, there is not much that really affects my view with respect to the property, or in fact, I can hardly see the story poles above the existing roof line. Mr. Guydis has been very thorough in explaining what he wanted to do to the property to me and to a number of the neighbors. And I could see that any two-story property next to a single-story property with a 50-foot wide lot by 180 deep, which most of our lots are, is going to be a concern. But nevertheless, it has taken place, it has taken place, and it seems like it's going to continue to take place. So it's a tough call, and I guess that's all I have to say on the issue. Any questions?
No questions. Thank you very much for speaking. Lee Quintana is my last speaker. Not my last speaker, but the last speaker, sorry.
Don't often get the last word. Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue. This is a street that I considered living on when we first moved here, and I love that street. Unfortunately, the house we wanted to buy was bought by somebody else first. I'd like to state that I think a lot of things that I was going to say have been stated already, such as from the street, yes, this is a very sympathetic, historic rendering of the architecture. However, the obscure glass, well, let me back up. However, the addition to the back, while it can't be seen from the street, is really very different than any of the other houses on Mariposa, especially below San Benito, in that it is one continuous long linear building into the backyard, which most of the others aren't because they have the detached garages. In addition to that, for the house on the downside, that building actually spans the full length of the backyard. So putting aside the question of privacy, it really does have an impact on the ambience in the backyard. And I think that is something that needs to be taken into consideration. You know, people move and things change, just like people will cut down trees and suddenly change the affect in a backyard. So the applicant could plant screening trees, but maybe the next neighbor doesn't like it and they'll come down. Obscure glass can be put in, but the next neighbor can take it out and put in regular glass without any kind of a permit. So I think going back to the historic part of it, it's just not, the design is not consistent with the lotting patterns in the other sections of the town, and the downhill neighbor has the unfortunate fact that their lot is only half of a lot deep, so it really affects them. And it seems to me that the two most affected neighbors, they did a good job of the uphill neighbor, but not the downhill neighbor, considering their concerns and their use of their backyard. So, you know, it's 50% good and 50% bad. And I think there are solutions. I wouldn't take out the redwood trees either, but I would look for other alternatives of either downsizing the garage, downsizing the studios, but keep it on as much as possible on a first story, maybe just a little bit of a second story, but not the full length of their house, their yard.
Oh, could you wait there in case we have questions? Does anyone have questions for Ms. Quintana? I do, and the question is, did you visit the site?
Yes, I did, and I also visited the backyard.
Of the site?
Downhill, no, not of the site itself, but of the downhill house.
Oh, you did, okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
and
To clarify that?
yeah.
All right, thank you. Okay, now I will call up the applicant, Mr. Gaitis. If you would like to come up and speak to us, and you can rebut what you've heard. If you want to shed any new information, give us something to think about, and then please stay at the podium. We will have questions for you.
I'd like to put one of these pictures back up that
Sure.
was here earlier. I'm not quite sure.
Mr. Parsons will help you do that. Thank you.
How do you focus this? A couple things about privacy. We have to meet a certain amount of light and ventilation in a structure, but we're more than willing to, besides the obscure glass, to make those fixed windows so that they're not operable, and get our ventilation on the other side of the house would be a thing we'd propose to give them privacy so that we couldn't, from that second story, see their backyard at all. We'd be willing to do that. And get ventilation through the inoperable skylights on both sides in that regard. Or if we could, eliminate, make the windows high, and so that, but being obscure solves that problem. And it's not our desire to peer down there. As you might see right here,
Please, go ahead.
this is our kitchen window right
Just take
here.
the microphone with you, if you want
okay.
to.
So this is our kitchen window right here, and this is their backyard. And as you see, our one story already looks into their backyard to a certain degree, but we never look into it. So it hasn't been an issue up till now, at least as far as we're concerned with it. And then the wisteria is on there for the great majority of the year, blocks, and it gives us privacy, them privacy and us privacy back and forth. But if you notice in Mr. Fall's proposal of putting that single-story structure adjacent to the kitchen all the way back, this is the kitchen here. But if you can imagine the continuation of this eave that goes up, down here, and up to here, you notice that the resolution of the eave right here on the second story goes across. And actually, a single story close to their property line is actually higher than the two-story placed where it's at. So in fact, if we were to put a single story along that one line, the roof line would continue this high all the way along here with a face along here, with windows directly marching along within 12 feet of their property line. And I see this as, just a much more of an invasion of their privacy. So I suggest that that's not a feasible plan. And also, you might notice the large trees that back up the structure, and it also reduces the general scale of it and nestles it into a cluster of large elements. It's not perceived as being so large because of its general relationship to the scale in the backyard. And,
did you want to finish that thought?
Well, also I wanted to directly respond to his plan here that there's no turnaround space, and you'd have to back up down an 11-foot driveway 185 feet with a car, and that would be pretty difficult.
Okay, thank you. Why don't you remain at the podium? Commissioners, do you have questions? I know I have a question. May I ask my question first, then we'll go on. But I noticed that you had skylights, Mr. Gaitis, and I
Yes.
wanted to know, did the Historic Preservation Committee evaluate those skylights?
They were presented in there, and there was no...
and there was no comment?
There's no comment.
Okay, I was under the impression when I served on historic preservation that we didn't really want skylights facing, streets or out.
It's not facing the street.
Well, because, I know it isn't, or facing neighbors, just because it creates,
So no
more
skylights?
light. Pardon me?
No skylights?
I don't know. I will check with that, but maybe that's not a concern. I thought it was.
Kind of essential in an art studio.
Okay. Commissioner Bourgeois.
Thank you. Could you maybe speak in a little more detail about the proposal that the neighbor put forward? Have you considered either having the art studio as a separate building or a detached garage, which is more consistent with your immediate neighbor's plan form? And were those things that were considered in your design process?
Yes. To make the garage more consistent, it would go to the east side of the property, right up next to the Falls property. And it would be directly over them. And put where it is now, it's clear to the other side of the property and would have less impact upon them. So keeping the development to the uphill side of the property has the least amount of effect to the people downhill. And also the backyard in that space there we're talking about, green, well, it's a green space, lots of trees. I'm going to quote my wife, Susan, there's habitat there that she loves. There's the gardens and the trees. This is our entertainment area back there, just like the Falls have there. And I can certainly respect their privacy, and we'll do everything possible to continue their privacy. But it's important for us to have a certain amount of open space and entertaining area in the backyard where we have these cluster of significant trees and gardens. And we did consider, putting the buildings elsewhere, but it fragments the yard. And you put a structure lined up, and many of the houses there have this fragmentation problem where the garage separates the backyard. So everybody kind of entertains in the remaining corridor between the open side of the garage and their neighboring lot, and then the whole back half of their property becomes virtually unusable, where if it was cohesive together and not fragmented, it becomes a much more desirable space. And that was important to us in the execution of that, yes.
Commissioner Rice?
I'm just curious, what neighbors have you met with on this project, other than the one on the uphill side?
The three across the street, and the one on the uphill side, and then I talked to the one directly behind me, and the one, let me see, directly, if you see the site plan there, there's one directly to the southern side, excuse me, the western side.
Had you met with Mr., I believe it's Butler?
No, I had. He's not on the list to be notified. Just the right and left properties. If you can see on A2.
So you talked to those that were notified, but nobody else. Is that?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
And I certainly, if he had any concerns or know he was concerned, I've been glad to meet with him. And then, as far as his statement about the condition or the house looking good, I think that elevation will look good, and it certainly will be less alarming than that orange tape that's up there now.
If I can
Yes,
follow
go
up with
ahead.
staff, I'm just curious why the notification area was so small, or is that standard?
This is a minor residential application, only requires the abutting neighbors to be notified.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I have some questions, some follow-up questions as well. So in thinking, I mean, if you just went with, what could we do here? And since the neighbors brought, some ideas for reorienting your project, you have a workshop also that's attached to the garage?
Yes, it's a space that's part of the garage downstairs.
Right.
And it's just a workshop area.
And how big is that? And could that be located to another part of your yard?
Well, it's
The idea here would be that we would work to reduce some of the mass and scale here.
The mass that's perceived by the neighbors is the second story mass, really not the first story.
Right.
So the workshop itself is not seen at all in any of the perceptions of anybody on the site. So I don't think it's a massing issue. What probably is the concern is the second story massing and the size of that.
Would you consider a reduction in the size of, the art studios themselves?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, if this becomes a concern, we would consider the reduction of that upper element.
Okay. And can you tell me, what is the height of your garage from floor, from grade to the ceiling?
24 feet to the rooftop.
No.
Oh, inside
Just of
the
the garage right now, the inside measurements.
It's 9 feet.
It's 9 feet. Is there an opportunity possibly to lower it a foot?
I have a car that has a greater than 7 foot clearance, and I'd like to put it in the garage, and it takes a 8 foot garage door to get into that space. But I must point out too that the garage is excavated into the hillside right now. So that it's the ground floor line is 30 inches lower than the existing residential floor line.
Right.
So right away we've made up for that foot and a half. So theoretically, from the finished floor of the house to the top of the garage ceiling is around 7 feet.
Right. Thank you. So when you were designing this, did you consider any other way to mass the roof? And
Yes.
Can you explain that a little bit further and give us a feeling about that?
Well, several things is separating the garage and putting it on the downhill side right away. I thought it would be another intrusion into the neighbors to the south, and keeping all the development or the structure on the uphill side. Next to an additional mass on the uphill side kind of clusters that mass together and helps step the division, and also keeping that long plane that you might perceive if that other garage wasn't there, disguised. So I think from all corners, or from the back and from the uphill side, the structure works well in that regard. On the downhill side, it's been pulled the full distance away, and it's in the same location as the existing garage, which has always been there and functioned well. We're just expanding upon that in a little ways. And it's important too to keep the house, keep the studio connected to the house, so that one could pass up the stairs into the studio without going outside, carrying planning on being there many years and going out and putting your coat on and going to your art studio in the evening, out and trudging through the garden in the rain isn't kind of what we envisioned our function to be.
Okay, I don't want to redesign this for you, but I just am thinking that we're trying to think of some alternatives here, and I noticed that you had somewhat of a patio space that was kind of outside your kitchen and your bedroom.
Yes.
And right now you have a bathroom that's connecting the bedroom to this structure.
Correct.
With stairs.
Uh-huh.
Is there any way that some of that massing could be somehow restructured at all for this, to reduce the length of the addition, of the second floor?
Well, it's clustered together pretty tight right now, and we actually, reduced a lot of the functions per requests of the historic committee to get articulation to that one side, and as a result, most of the space of the structure has been derived out of function. The size of the wash machines, the size of 2 sinks, the size of a tub, the distance between a tub and a wall are all minimal. Okay. So as we line out those functions, the size of a car, and they go out, then each one of those to the backside of the garage are all a product of kind of basic functions, and they're all minimal.
Mm-hmm. Another question, I don't know if this would help at all. Did you ever think about adding, I don't even know if it would work, dormers instead of the windows that you have?
To articulate the surface more?
Mm-hmm. Well, and also to somehow perhaps lower the roof line a tad?
Yeah, yes, and right now on the second story there is a 8-foot plate inside that ceiling. Mm-hmm. And we thought about lowering that second story plate to maybe 6 feet, mm-hmm. or 6'6", mm-hmm. which would reduce the overall height by 18 inches, mm-hmm. and reduce that vertical plane of that one side. Mm-hmm. And that would certainly reduce the mass on that one side, and we're willing to do that.
Okay, that's great. Another idea would be to flip anything, windows that would be looking out onto another's yard. If you flipped it to I guess it'd be the west instead of the east, since you don't seem to have any concerns from neighbors adjacent to you on the upper side, mm-hmm. the uphill side.
Yes, if we do, to deal with their concerns, do fixed windows there, then we'd have to have windows on the other side to get the proper ventilation in the space. And we do have some, and there's doors in the second studio, so that would actually work too.
Okay.
I thought about something else that might help that lower elevation too, and that is that the second story studio has a vertical over the garage face, which directly faces the neighbors to the east. If we were to take that second story and pull it back 2 feet from the edge of the face of the garage all the way along there and continue that shed roof up to the top, that would pull the building another 2 feet back, mm-hmm. and be right in line where the original building was.
And if you did the other 18 inches, it would also reduce it in the height.
Reduce it down 18 inches and pull it back 2 feet.
So it would open up more of a view.
So it would really reduce the mass and scale and the impact on the neighbors.
Right. There was one other thing that I saw in the letter from the neighbor, and I know it's a very tight, those lots are very long and narrow. I live in a long and narrow one too, I understand. And it was the backing up or the pulling into the garage with cars, and the neighbor mentioned that she was a little concerned about if you should ever, you could come through if you maneuvered the car and you came through the fence, and she was concerned about a car coming through her fence. So, and I know there's just a little thin fence separating there. Is there any way that, and I don't even know what it could be, maybe you could work with a neighbor on this, that a short wall could be put in there, a thin wall that would be a little more stable than a wooden fence? That's just a question. And
sure, I'd like to address that. the likeliness of a car actually going into a fence would be when it's somewhat at 90 degrees to the fence or some sort of angle where it was moving toward the fence. Its likeliness of penetrating the fence when the car is traveling parallel to the fence is highly unlikely. Directly to their house, when we travel along the fence, paralleling the fence, there's a curb there, so the car wheel would strike the curb before it would go over into the fence along that side. But that fence needs to be rebuilt anyway along that side, and we are more than willing to cost share and participate in doing that, rebuilding their fence along there, which is a lot of plants on those fences we both like, and it would have to be a careful thing to maintain the screening there and rebuild those fences, but we're more than willing to share in rebuilding that, and certainly build it out of material that is sturdy enough to resist any kind of car bumping into it. And also along the part of the driveway where the cars are starting to turn and going in and out of the garage, the cars aren't backing up or turning in that area. They just make one arc and back out. That fence is a new fence, and it has 6x6 posts that are in the concrete, so that fence is fairly sturdy along there. And there's a curb along there, but also prevents the car from actually going through the fence on the side. The bumper may knock out a few boards if a car rolled into it, but it shouldn't go over. It should not go over that curb.
All right, well, thank you very much. Those are all the questions I have. Commissioners, do you have any other questions? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, and thank you very much for coming back and answering very specifically
thank you for
our
your
questions.
consideration.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioners, I'm going to turn this over to us and you. I'm going to look for you for a motion, discussion, questions of staff.
I have a question of the chair.
Question of the chair.
Well, you're going back and forth with the applicant over a whole bunch of different design changes, and
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
He opened the door, though, when...
I understand that,
Yeah.
but I'm curious where you want to go from here, because I can't approve something I can't see, and I sure hate the thought of sending the applicant back to historic, but if you're going to make significant changes...
Well, actually, that's going to be my question to staff, because I don't know the answer to that. And that is, if this does need to be modified in some way as far as the design to accommodate the neighbors' concerns for privacy and view, does this have to go back to HPC, which is Historic Preservation?
Yes.
It does.
If I may follow?
You may follow, because I'm going to chew on that for a minute.
Because, and I'll state my perspective on the project at the same time. I sat on historic preservation, and I looked at it from a historic preservation perspective at the time that it came through there. Now sitting here, looking at it from a planning perspective, I do have a problem with the massing from the side. And I have a feeling it's going to end up back at historic with a redesign, but...
Well, when it is in Historic Preservation Committee, as we know who've served on there, Commissioner Kane and Rice and myself, your focus is extremely narrow. You do not, their neighbors probably were not there complaining.
They're not notified.
They're not notified. So it's a different, they look at different issues. They look at the preservation of the character of the structure, the historic house. We, on the other hand, take into effect a much broader concern of issues that are, brought to us by neighbors or staff if there is something. So that's why, I hate to do this. I hate to take the second step. On the other hand, I'm encouraged because it doesn't seem that the neighbors have met to really talk about this together for a long time, and I'm thinking that I'm hearing that there's, some real movement and some that people want to move toward maybe a better solution now that we know some impacts. But that's just my first thought. And as a planning commission, that is what we are to do, is to, hopefully take all this in and work for compromise and better solutions. Commissioner Kane had his hand up first, and then Commissioner Rice.
Yeah, I'm prepared to make a motion. But first, before I do it, you know, we've got some precedent with additions and remodels and the resultant up-down windows. And I'm not saying I agree with it, but I do recall when I went to town council and we had very specific guidance on higher windows. And I'm not even saying I was in agreement with what they said. But it seemed to me that it was a compromise of rights of both parties. And I've suggested, staff and I have talked, I've talked with the chairperson about making sure that the revised new coming residential guidelines have something about windows and privacy. But we don't have that right now, and I really am reluctant to send it back to historical. I don't think we're that far apart. I heard the chairperson talking with the applicant. The applicant sounds pretty willing to do a heck of a lot of things. And it's, you know, I'm not going to make a speech on it's not a perfect world, but where it comes to.
Commissioner Kane, I think, though,
Did you want to make a motion?
No, but I wanted to interrupt you with a thought, excuse me, and I don't really ever like to do that. But the point is that this is the process it would have to return to.
Why?
I mean, if it's going to be redesigned.
Well, maybe my motion would be that we don't do that.
Oh, well, you're right. I stand corrected. Thank you.
What I'm thinking is the elevated windows. If they were elevated when a person is standing, so that it's line of sight, military line of sight, it's straight out the window. You can't look down. And if they're willing to make them permanent windows, and if they're willing to make them translucent on the side that faces the neighbor's property, you know, that's about the best decisions we've come up with in the past 3-4 years that I know of to protect the side-by-side houses, and most houses are side-by-side, and a lot of them in this town are on hillside. What concerns me less, if I can find support for this concern, is windows that look into the backyard. Everybody's windows looks into somebody's backyard. And I would be less concerned about that in the spirit of compromise, while I'd be very concerned about eye-level windows, translucent glass in the side-by-side house windows. So I'm asking if we can send this back to staff, bring it forward again in a week or, well, in this coming meeting, unless we need notification, or in the meeting after that, to see if the parties have worked it out. And if they haven't worked it out, then we can take a more difficult black and white win-lose approach. But if the applicant is willing to make so many changes, then I'd like to give them a chance to do that before we remodify everything and send it back to historical, which will take another month or 2 or 3.
Well, I'm not sure how long it would take to go back, and I think that if Mr. Gaitis is willing to remask the roof, it might have to go back to historic, but maybe there's a quicker, faster way to do that. Is there some way we can do it in a more expedient way for this property owner?
Well, it may be possible for the applicant to move that wall back 2 feet, drop the plate height 18 inches, and it will look substantially the same as the version that HPC reviewed previously.
Okay.
I think if he's able to do that with the only difference that the wall is now 2 feet back, then I would classify that as an insubstantial change. Does not need to be revisited and restudied by HPC. It could come directly back to the Planning Commission.
Okay. There you go.
So, Mr. Sudet, how would we phrase such a motion to capture the best of all worlds? That we send the matter back, that it come to us with a date certain on specific directions, that the parties pursue the points and principles discussed tonight with the chair on the wall, on the roof, with the eye-level transom windows, translucent glass, and anything else you can think of that can possibly accommodate your neighbors in the very sensitive issue of privacy. And that in lieu of a major redesign, going back to historic, and then possibly going back through the process on a win-lose and you lose. So maybe we can find an easier way out and achieve a win-win. So the motion is.
Thank you. Commissioner Kane?
Did I keep it? That the minor residential application MR 0630 be returned to staff in the hopes that the applicant and the appellant can possibly work a compromise along the lines that were discussed tonight, with the wall setback, with the roof lowered, with the translucent glass, and anything else you're willing to do to accommodate, and that we bring it back here as quickly as possible with respect to Mr. Paulson's schedule and Mr. Suda's schedule, and the ability of the parties to meet. So either our next meeting or the meeting after that.
To the chair, I think we've discussed the agenda for the next meeting.
It will not happen on the, I don't think so.
I think
It's a long meeting, August 25th, right?
Right.
It's a very long meeting. What's the next?
So that the next meeting would be September 12th.
Let's put
it at the top of September
22nd,
Right.
not 25th. August 22nd is when we're
22nd, I'm sorry. Something else is, all right, August 22nd. So I'd like to open the public hearing just to ask the applicant if September 12th, is that it?
That's correct.
Would you be able to have something ready by then, do you think? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your patience, too. All right, Commissioners, we have a motion.
I need a second.
And we need a second. Do you want the motion repeated, or do you think you pretty much know it? All right, do we have a second? Okay, I will second that motion. And then I'm going to call for a vote, and why am I thinking it's not going to work? Because I'm a clairvoyant. Could we discuss it? I'd like to open it for discussion. I see maybe Commissioner Rice?
I still have a concern of the overall mass. And, I mean, I guess I would support it to have it come back and I'll look at it, but I'm still concerned. You know, we just spent on the previous application a whole lot of time talking about the cellar policy. I'm not saying we put a cellar here to reduce visible mass, but the whole conversation is about visible mass.
Okay, can you be a little more specific about, just of the whole second story? What is the?
As you look at that, that is a big, long, two-story wall to the neighbor on the downhill side and the neighbor below that, who wasn't even noticed on the meeting. When it came through historic, we were particularly concerned about the articulation along that wall, and one of the things that you're looking at doing is removing that articulation. So, you know, one of the points that specifically was addressed from historic perspective, from HPC perspective, we're going to remove and not ask HPC about it, and I am very uncomfortable with that.
Okay, I thank you for your remarks, and that does give us something to think about, and especially since you served on that committee and saw the project, that kind of testimony is very valuable. Thank you, Commissioner Rice. Commissioner Bourgeois?
I'm on the fence with where the motion is now. It's the first time I'm seeing this. I was not the only one up here that wasn't on historic to have seen this application before.
We'll take care of that next year.
So, when we were in General Plan Committee, when we were going through suggestions and walking through the residential design guidelines, one of the dominant factors that we kind of came up with as a committee that really defines a neighborhood is the placement of the garage. It's a very important part of the neighborhood. And the houses on either side, I mean, a detached garage is kind of what this neighborhood is about. And we have conflicts with these huge trees, though. And I just would have liked to have seen maybe the art studio as a separate building nestled in the trees. Or I just think there are other options that I think are viable. Because, the massing looks really awkward from the side. And so I'm just struggling with that. I really appreciate the spirit of compromise that the applicant has come here with. I applaud that, and yeah, so that's where I am. I'm struggling with this one.
Nothing in the motion prohibits them from coming up with a new plan.
But I think if they do come up with a new plan, they're going back to historic, and that's counter to the intent, I believe, of how you phrased your motion. Am I incorrect?
That would be right. And so do you think, okay, to get both of you on board, could Michael, or Commissioner Kane, rephrase his motion? And Commissioner Kane, let me ask you, would you think about rephrasing your motion so that it could be a little more broader?
I'll listen to any amendment suggested. Make a motion.
How about your motion is stated as the approach you've taken is your preference, but that in addition to that, they will staff, I mean, maybe if they cut down a 70-inch tree, there's not enough room on site to mitigate the tree impacts. I mean, you know, there's an answer. There's some information we can use. But I would like to see, you know, a separate garage, separate art studio, something like that considered, maybe in a little more detail for us to look at.
Well, certainly there's a workshop that's attached to the garage, so there's room there. There's a lot of room, I think, for looking at something a little differently.
And if
thinking out of the box.
Yeah, if the revisions are expanded to include those considerations, then I would support the motion.
All right. Commissioner Kane, do you want to have some help with?
Commissioner Rice wants to.
Oh, Commissioner Rice.
While I agree with what you're saying, Commissioner Bourgeois, I think it invalidates the intent of the motion, which is to bring it back here. So I can't find a way to support the motion as it stands. Sorry about that.
Commissioner Kane?
Commissioner Bourgeois, I can add that to my motion. Just gives them the freedom to try to work it out. And if they work it out along the lines that you're concerned with and it has to go back to HPC, so what? I mean, we then have a deal and peace with our neighbors. I'm okay with that. It could be a two-pronged motion. Whatever they want to do, I'll give them the freedom to make one more chance at it, knowing that if that fails, they come back for a win-lose. But I certainly wouldn't support anything that touches those trees because I've walked the property and they're reasonably magnificent. So if we can add John's provision to what we've already stated, that would be my amended motion. And if it's okay with the seconder, then we can call it.
And it would be, Mr. Suda, would you like to comment on this very complicated issue? It
Actually,
didn't look like it.
if Commissioner Bourgeois could restate his amendment, I apologize, but
It was hard.
yeah, I want to make sure I've got this clear.
Well, in the motion, we specified certain design considerations: the height, the windows, the setting it back 2 feet.
Would you like to, excuse me, may I interrupt? Would you like to hear the original?
I think you can.
Okay, you're fine on it? Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
I think I got it. I don't think the reassessment of the design should be limited to just those features, and to see, you know, you make those changes, see if the neighbors are okay with it, and you either come back or you don't. I think we should also give a little more emphasis on relocating the garage or relocating the art studio as a separate building.
With the intent of reducing the overall second-story mass of the structure.
Of the rear element.
And so that would actually not be emphasis, that would be direction. Commissioner Rice.
I can support that. Thank you. And if I could add one more thing, if it would be acceptable to the maker and the seconder of the motion, would be I would like this noticed as a normal project as opposed to a minor project, only because we've already heard we've got one neighbor who was not noticed as here and had, I think, valuable input to the public hearing. So I'd like to broaden that out to the normal, 500 feet?
Well, normal for a minor res.
Not normal for minor res.
By town code is adjoining.
Right, but I think this is taking on a little bit bigger proportions than a minor, at least from my perspective it is, and I'd like it noticed beyond the immediate adjacent properties.
An architectural and site application is 300 feet.
Okay, 300 feet, if that's acceptable to you for when it comes back to us.
That would be,
That is not acceptable to me.
I would agree, I don't see it either. But I have a feeling that probably now that the project might be going back for redesign, people might hear about it naturally. So I think that that might happen without me telling anybody what to do. Okay, so I believe we have a motion. Do we need to have it repeated?
No, I'm okay with it.
Okay. Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure? Okay. In that case, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed?
Nay.
Okay, 3-1. Motion does pass. And thank you very much, both of you, and thank you, the applicant. You were wonderful in the way you explained your thought processes for your design, and thank you for agreeing to work further on this. Appreciate it very much. All here to work for a better resolution. Thanks.
And just to confirm, that was a continuance to a date specific, September 12th.
Right, which the applicant can make. No, that was in the motion. Now, do you want to repeat the rights?
There are no appeal rights at
No
this time.
appeal. Trying to cover all the bases. Thank you very much. Okay, Commissioners, we are almost at the end of our agenda, and I think the next thing is a report from the Development Director. And Mr. Suda, is there anything we need to know? And then we have commission matters.
Nothing formal. I just, about 2 months ago, I mentioned to you the release of the ABAG and state housing allocation numbers. Those were adopted by the ABAG board. The rough numbers, 600 units have been allocated to the town of Los Gatos by 2014. About 55 to 60% of those are to be affordable units, which is an ambitious goal, and needless to say. We are going to be agendizing this for our General Plan Committee discussion, so we'll be writing up a summary of what the allocation process entails, what those numbers are. We will be forwarding you that same memo to keep you in the loop, because you'll be engaged very quickly as we undertake an update of the housing elements. We want to keep you in the loop on what that process is and what those numbers are looking like, so stay tuned.
And if I'm not mistaken, the town of Los Gatos has done a very good job of staying abreast of the numbers they've been given in the past. Is that correct?
Yes, and in the past we've always been able to get our housing element certified by the state of California. And I think we had a discussion with some of the other directors, planning directors in the county today. We're going to be continuing that discussion here in the next month or so. But step one is we want to pull the directors together to get ideas on how all the other cities in the county, because we all have some pretty aggressive housing numbers, and we want to understand how all the other cities are going to be responding. If we can craft a unified response, I think that will have a bigger influence.
Yeah, I think that's terrific to do. Any comments? No. All right, thank you. But we do have some commission matters, and one thing I'd like to bring up was, although I'm sorry that our other three commissioners aren't here, is that I thought that our July 25th meeting, which turned out to be a walk in the park, so to speak, around for looking at architectures in the neighborhoods here, I thought that was very beneficial for all of us. And that is part of the training that we're trying to keep going this year. And as such, I would like to perhaps entertain another training session. It may require another meeting, or maybe we can find a short agenda and tag it on the back of it. But and I really am not. We can bring it up now, but I would like the input from the other three commissioners. So, but my preference would be perhaps to have a DRC, a Development Review Committee, review and see what the requirements are, and see how the Planning Commission can interface with that, or does interface with that. Any thoughts on this with the DRC, Development Review Committee? Any thoughts on that?
I'd be in
Commissioner
favor
Wright?
of that.
Okay. And Commissioner Bourgeois as well. And Commissioner Kane, any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I'm not sure I know what you mean.
Well, that the next training be regarding the review process of the Development Review Committee.
What they do?
Right.
Why?
And why, and how we interface with them,
Well,
and what we interface with, how that happens.
I had discussed with Mr. Suda earlier, taking that perhaps one step forward and maybe agendizing for discussion a so-called 1 in 20 policy, where on the presumption that there's some ratio of how many applications the DRC looks at, that there's some number that gets into a gray area. And on our walking tour, we saw 1 or 2 examples of the gray area. We've heard speakers speak about their feelings on alleged gray areas of projects that were approved by DRC. And I was talking to Mr. Suda about giving the DRC an alternative that as he, Randy, we are able to define this language of what is gray, that would give them the option of forwarding such an application to the Planning Commission for review on placement on the consent calendar. Now, earlier tonight, we had a consent calendar item on what I called de minimis. And I was thinking, if the DRC is not black and white sure of the project in front of them, it meets the numerical this and that, but as the case with some of the houses we looked at, once they were up, they looked quite different. If those kind of projects could be sent to us on a consent calendar format, and given maybe a de minimis dismissal of saying, well, we appreciate looking at this, but it looks okay. Or we have a concern and we want to remove it from the consent count. Do you want me to stop? Or we remove it from the consent calendar?
The answer was
and then give it
yes.
a full
And
process.
the reason, I'm going to interrupt you, and that's exactly the point of some training and then some discussion afterwards about the Development Review Committee. Mr. Suda has posed questions to us during that walk. We can talk about, a lot of it is covered by what you just said, so that would be the intent of having this, Commissioner Kane. So that was my intent and hope anyway. In the meantime, what I would like to suggest, and I know that I'm not sure when the Development Review Committee meetings are, but just to really get familiar with, how that works. I have not even attended one. I'm going to attend one. I would encourage all of the commissioners to attend one so that we know what we're talking about or what we're being presented with. And I think it's right here in the chambers. I don't even know that. Do they always meet on the same day? I'm not sure.
Generally every Tuesday at 9 a.m.
All right. So there you have it. So, and we will, either I will talk individually with the 3 commissioners that are not here about this, or we can bring it up. Just do it. Just do it? Okay.
You have a majority of the...
Oh, we do. Thank you. I keep forgetting. And a strong majority. Thank you. You were terrific to work with tonight. Well, you were terrific to work with tonight. So should we go ahead and set a date? Is that what you're thinking? Or we'll set the date or we'll come up with some dates?
I think we'll talk to the chair and review those upcoming agendas.
Okay.
Make sure it's one where we have enough time where we can
get things
really
prepared.
Spend some time and focus on it and get prepared.
Thank you so much, Mr. Suda. Anything else? Oh, 2 things. Commissioner Bourgeois and then Commissioner Rice.
Thank you. I don't know if my fellow commissioners saw there was a special meeting of the town council they held on climate change initiatives in town. And it was, a month or so ago before the town council meeting. And Ms. Faulkner, the director of community services, they're heading up an initiative to look at what the town's doing, what they can do for, the town, greening us up, so to speak. And I think, as evidence from tonight, I tried calling Ms. Faulkner, but I missed her before she went on her vacation. So I just wanted to kind of plant a seed. I think there are a lot of land use issues that speak to the exact things that she's talking about. I mean, if we look at tonight's example, what does green building mean? Does it mean a smaller house or a bigger house with all of these elements in it? Does it mean grading? So I think there are a lot of code, policies, recommendations on the books that speak to these issues, and I think we as a planning commission could perhaps elucidate where some of those are gray and it's not certain, but we could maybe tighten them up a little bit, and it could speak to these things that council is looking at. I would be happy to spearhead a small ad hoc committee to just kind of go through and outline what we're already doing, because we're already doing some things, and what perhaps we could do better and where we could go with this in the future. I don't know if that's something anyone else is interested in, but I thought I'd throw it out there.
Well, thank you very much. I think that we should consider that. I have a feeling that Commissioner Sayoc might be very interested to be on that committee with you. Would that be something that the staff could also use? I don't know. Maybe you have experts already that you call on, or go ahead.
My point was, I don't want to exclude staff, but my point is to not burden planning staff with a further task, and so kind of take some planning input to the community services department from the volunteers,
right,
instead of burdening staff with another task. That was kind of my idea of taking it here.
And I totally understood that, which is why I was asking, would that be something that would be beneficial to the staff, Mr. Suda, or would they want to serve on this ad hoc with a planning commissioner?
Well, the direction from council is that effort from a land use perspective will be included in the general plan update process. So that's where staff will be involved in conjunction with the land use consultant in that process. So the land use component is one part of the overall green strategy that Regina will be working on. What I would suggest is that you hold that thought in terms of this subcommittee. When Regina returns next month, let me touch base with her and see if this will be productive and if there's an appropriate way to plug that into her process, and then I'll report back.
In the interim, though, I'm wondering if it might be helpful for the commissioners to have some type of you were saying, John, a one-page, what did you say that it would result in, what you would do?
Well, just looking at the format of the report that she prepared for council,
Right.
It was, here's what we're doing already.
Right.
Here's what we could be doing. And so I thought, that would be something we could draft up from
I see.
a planning perspective. And I'm sure it would be more than one page.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Did we forward copies of that report to the commission?
No, I was
Okay,
just going
we
to
will
say
do
I
that.
would like to have had copies of that. That would have been interesting to read.
And
Thank
the
you.
only reason I brought it, I agree that we should wait for Ms. Faulkner and coordinate with her, but I know that she's in the process of preparing for another council meeting, and I don't know when I thought it was December or something, and so I just wanted to try and get out ahead of it and just throw the idea out there.
I'm sure that she will be happy to hear that there'll be some more help along the way for her. Commissioner Rice?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment or notify staff that I had previously said for the September 12th meeting I would not be here because I have a business trip. My flight, the United Airlines and traffic permitting, I land in San Francisco at 5:30, and I will be coming to that meeting. So if everything works out, I'll make it by 7, but if not, shortly thereafter, I'm sure.
Well, thank you very much for letting us know that, and we'll look forward to seeing you. Commissioner Kane?
Well, since Commissioner Bourgeois doesn't have to prepare that report for another month, I was wondering, unless staff disagrees, that he and staff maybe could get together on giving us that one-page, 8.5 by 11 discourse on 15.301 and 15.303 to include the text, because I don't think all of us have it. I don't think all of us understand CEQA's definition of a project, whether or not we're supposed to take a closer look, where the initial study comes in, the neg deck, the et cetera. John gave me a good discussion of it, and you gave me a wonderful discussion earlier, and I'm starting to get it, but if we could just have a piece of paper that I could file with our other resolutions and documents and use to better do my homework, I'd appreciate that. So whoever does it, I don't care. John's given me a good description. You've given me a good description. I just want to put it on paper so I can do a better job of learning it.
What specifically are you looking for? The list of all the categorical exemptions, or are you looking for a summary of CEQA, which will be more than one page?
I'm not looking for a summary of CEQA, unless Commissioner Rice wanted to supplement this. But what I'm looking for is utility, a tool, and it says when most of our applications say this is categorically exempt under 15301. What does that mean? What is the test? What do I apply? If you want to go as far as to, to define what a project is under CEQA, fine. But if not, that's okay too. What does 15301 mean? What are we looking for? What is 15303? And if there are others that are stamped onto our application that we're supposed to know, because John's taught me that under state law, we're the final arbiters, applicators, what did you tell me, of CEQA. We decide whether something's categorically exempt or not.
We are a deciding body under CEQA, but we're not ultimately I think council is the ultimate.
Okay.
We are a deciding body.
And if we're going to advise them or even decide it at this level, we ought to know what we're doing, and I'm not sure I do, and I'm not sure others do. So we need an education on those two.
Let me throw out a few options, and one is you and I could schedule a time, and I can walk you through the CEQA process. And it reminds we used to lecture on this in grad school. When I was teaching in San Jose State for 7 years, I could just get my lecture notes and kind of walk you through the process of how it works mechanically. And then, in particular, we can spend some time focusing on what those categorical exemptions means, what 15301, 302, 303. I mean, there's a list of about 5 that we use most commonly.
Right. Sandy Bailey gave me copies of the text today, and I don't think that's come to us before in our handbooks or other things, and it's on every one of our applications. We ought to know what it means and how to apply it.
And one other comment is I know that the City Attorneys Association just published a package of 2-page summaries of key aspects of the legal process, one of which is on CEQA. I haven't reviewed it yet. It was just published yesterday, but I'll take a look at it. I'll forward it to all of you. I can't guarantee how helpful it's going to be. I haven't looked at it. Lastly, there's a subcommittee, and I don't know if you raised this when I was on vacation, but there is a subcommittee of the commission that's been working with staff on some format changes for staff reports.
Thank you for reminding me.
One of which is to add more discussion and verbiage to the categorical exemption section that will explain in summary form what 15301 means.
Exactly.
So that would be coming to you on every staff report.
When we look at the staff
future.
report, that's not really covered in findings.
And Mr. Suda, thank you for reminding me about that, but how is that going? I know you've taken it for approval or for input, I suppose, or for review to some people, and are we almost ready to present it to our commission?
I think we are. Again, I've scheduled another meeting with the town attorney to review that. Bud and I have discussed it. I've walked through your changes. It hasn't raised issues in our minds. So really the last, again, is to have the city attorney buy off on the model resos.
Maybe we can look forward to that, I don't know, on July or August 22nd?
Well, we can agendize that August 22nd. I think it would be appropriate, even without the final resolution on the model reso portion, we can certainly review the rest of the recommendations from the subcommittee.
All right. Super. Thank you very much. Commissioners, I'm going to adjourn this meeting unless I see another hand up. Thank you very much for your hard work today. You were terrific. Adjourned.